Good evening and welcome to Speakers Corner UK. We are back this evening here in the UK and elsewhere around the world. It may not be the morning, it may not be the afternoon for you or the evening for you, but it certainly is the evening for us here. So a warm welcome, and a warm welcome, of course, to my co-host, Stopspamming. Good evening, sir.
Greetings from planet Earth.
Indeed. We're all here tonight. We've been a little bit busy, Stops and I, so we are back tonight with a review of The Arena. So to put it in context, The Arena is I guess, weekly or whenever interaction with some Muslims on Hamza's Den. So Darren Hamza is a Muslim from Speaker's Corner. He hosts Hamza's Den, which is a channel where he wants to make it similar to Speaker's Corner. And in this particular case, there's, well, from the review you'll be seeing tonight, there's 5 Muslims and then they'll have one guest on at a time, which is a bit of an overload. It's not usually like that in Speaker's Corner, or to the degree that it is. You can normally hone in on one particular interlocutor and have a backwards and forwards there, and you'll get other people that'll heckle. And so there's more of a dynamic in Speaker's Corner. Here it's carefully moderated and only one person coming at a time. Like if Stops and I were to go in there together, I think that would cause a bit of carnage. But of course, they will only allow one person, and then at least 3 or 4 of them will fire questions at different points in time. So it's heavily loaded in their favor in terms of at least number of people in the channel. That doesn't mean, of course, that they have the upper hand. In any case, I think they're outnumbered in a different way, but I'll leave that for people, the considerate people who are listening to understand what that means. So we're going to review a section of this particular stream with a gentleman that comes on called Mosster. He's going to come on. He, in fact, sent me a message on Twitter, said, hey, I was on this, could you do a review? And I said, yes, we'll see what we can do. And fortunately, Stops and I are here together tonight as the I can't even pronounce the surname, that second part again, Stops, so do pronounce that for us and remind us what the name means.
It's Euthyphro. It's from Greek. Aletheia means truth, and phobia is the unwarranted fear of the truth, and I am the anti-phobia true truthist. In other words, I'm against lying. So that's easy. By the way, Thinking Clearly is saying you're a little bit soft. I don't know if you can jack it up half a dB.
Let me see if there's a way to turn this up a little bit. So we're looking here at audio. So let's just see if this makes a difference. Am I making it louder now?
No, not yet.
I'll turn it up, see if that makes any difference now. I've turned the volume up.
That's a little bit better, yes.
Okay, great. So hopefully that's now.
All right, welcome to the chat. Welcome, people. If there's anything that you want to comment, please do. Hang on, where was the volume control?
Yeah, there's supposed to be a volume control on here. I'm not sure where it is, but we'll find it.
Automatically, let me do it in automatic. You can switch it from automatic to manual.
Yeah, I saw that.
So if you do it on manual and jack it up a bit, then it should work. I don't know what you've got it set up.
I've turned it up to 150. So let's see. Hopefully now, give me feedback in the chat if you're listening. If I'm loud enough here, hopefully I'm not blasting your ears out. Just let me know where we're at, and then we're ready to go. So let's bring up the video. And as I say, we're going to start here at about 20 minutes and 50 odd seconds. So this is just as Mosster comes in, and so he's going to now be bringing a few questions or a line of questioning, hopefully, to the guys on Hamza's Den.
Have you watched any of this?
Yes, I have watched this. I started watching it again just earlier on tonight. I didn't get through all of it again, but it's going to be fascinating. Again, we're going to see.
Okay, because I haven't. I have no idea what's going to hit me.
Okay, good. So you'll be able to do it raw and live in the moment, and I'll give you some thoughts because I have listened to it. But as I go through it again, I'm sure I'll pick up some more things as well. So with that note, let us get straight on into this, and here we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you Muslim?
Hello?
Hello?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Alhamdulillah. Astaghfirullah.
So, assalamu alaikum, guys. The thing is that I know you don't like the term, but I'm an ex-Muslim. But I really appreciate what you're doing here, especially Hamza.
Okay. Thank you.
Huh?
So
What
I
is he
have
doing?
a question
Did you have
about.
any?
Yeah. Just first thing, we
Sorry,
don't.
I
We
also
don't
wanted to. I also wanted to congratulate.
I think what he sort of started out with here is he wanted to set everybody at ease, because you'll see in a moment he feels like often there's talking over each other and stuff. So I think maybe if I'm going to presuppose, the idea was, hey, I'm going to thank you for doing this, etc. Get everybody calm so they're not on the defensive, and so that he can hopefully have a decent conversation. So I'm going to surmise that the pleasantries are there to help make allow the conversation to flow a little bit easier than he feels like it may have done in the past.
Okay, then I would, if I may, I would suggest if you do something like this, try and be specific. Try not to. I mean, I know that you're trying to appease him and get him blah blah. I understand that, but I would always use something specific. The same way as I would always go and start talking to a girl by saying something very very specific about her that she can relate to. The same thing that I would suggest always do this. If you say, don't say just, I appreciate what you're doing. Say, I appreciate that you have got the guts now to go and address these issues and get into a dialogue with atheists or something like this, but make it more specific, not just in general. It's just a suggestion in communication.
Congratulate Yusuf for getting the apartment. I follow him on Twitter as well. So
Oh, thank
Oh,
you.
alhamdulillah.
congrats
See,
on that.
that's perfect. That's very,
And,
very
hopefully
good.
moving
so
That
I
you
have-
have something that you have something very specific that you can relate to, and you can see immediately how the smiles go up. Much, much, much better. Excellent stuff.
It's awesome. So I've seen a bunch of interactions with atheists and Muslims on this channel, but it seems to me like sometimes what happens is people tend to talk over each other because they have their own certain assumptions. So in the spirit of that, I've prepared like a line of questioning just to clarify issues as to what the Islamic view on the objective morality is. So I want to begin with the very basic, like how do you define objective? Just the definition of the term objective.
So objective would be that which is external or in the world. So I guess this is maybe where I kind of am a little bit distinct from how people usually word it. I would say that Islamic morality is transcendental because it is found with God, and God isn't in the world. And I would refer to objective things like this and my tablet and my cup. And so I don't see morality as being out there like an object. I see its source being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the word I would refer to it as is absolute and transcendental. Objective
Oh,
is a term that
Go on
Okay,
then,
there's
you
a lot
make a
wrong
comment
there.
first. Go on then.
go for it. You hit it.
Well, okay, so I think one of the main things is to clarify. It isn't clear to me if he's saying that Allah is, absolute and transcendental, but he's saying it's like, because that wasn't a particularly clear explanation. I mean, I don't know if you got it clear. I mean, maybe we have to re-listen to it again, but that wasn't particularly clear to me, because the question I have is it something like your phone? You've held up your phone. Is morality something like that? In other words, because he said it's something external, right? To me, objective means mind independence, independent of mind, i.e., just give an easy example like the sun exists, right? That's an objective fact of the matter, to the best of our ability. That's an objective fact of the matter, regardless of whether there's any mind, the sun exists, something like that. So is he saying that it's analogous to this? There's this property, for want of a better word, called objective morals that exists regardless of a mind. Now, he probably won't. He would probably say, no, well, external, and you'll hear it later on. It's just, it's not human. Well, that obviously, and we'll get to that part, and we'll deal with that at that moment in time. But if you say that it's from the mind of God, okay, well, that all you're saying is that it's coming from another more powerful mind than yours. What makes that objective? Because if you compare it with a concrete object like your phone, well, is this thing a concrete object? And of course, I would hope that they would say, no, it's not, if they sort of know what they're talking about. A thought or a virtue or a moral isn't a concrete object, or not as far as I know anyway. I mean, you could take a Platonic view, but that's not something that these guys would want to go down the route. So they want to say that morals is from God in some sense, and hopefully he'll elucidate. But that wasn't a very clear way, and so I would be asking, could I ask you, Yusuf, do you mean that it's mind independent, i.e. it's a fact of the matter, as in like, there's a sun out there or your phone is in your hand or whatever the case is? Is that what you mean when you say objective? Because this isn't actually clarified, and you'll hear a bit later on, it's not clear enough, and you'll hear later on that because we weren't clear at this beginning part, they're able to go all over the show.
And this is the problem. I'm actually disappointed because he's not answering the question. The question is, what is objective? What is your definition? What is your understanding of objective if you hear the word objective? He's already throwing in all sorts of things. This has nothing to do with morality yet. We're talking only about objective. And there's no need to go into other areas here, because as soon as it's the usual thing, as soon as they come up with an analogy, it's faulty. It's somehow strained or simply does not apply. And the same thing here again. Instead of just saying, look, it's exactly what you are saying. It's not dependent on a mind. That's it. That's the answer that would be correct, instead of going into this whole explanation about phones and things like that.
That developed much later, at the early Enlightenment period. And I think we conflate the words.
Yeah, he's just talking about when the word objective came into being. That's irrelevant. What we need is to understand what it refers to, not when it came into being. So because if you're all on the same playing field and you all agree on what the word objective means, then you can move forward. If there's a disagreement around this, that needs to be clarified up front. Otherwise, you're going to be very difficult to proceed further. If one person says, this is what I mean, somebody else goes, no, I think objective means that, then you're not going to have a meeting of the minds. And I do think you need agreement there, or at least even if you're not going to agree with the other person, then you're going to have to, for the sake of argument, accept that what they say is what if you want to proceed further on to hear the argument.
People use it when people say objective morality, I think they generally mean what I'm describing as absolute and transcendental, and they've just not necessarily made the distinction as to what objective usually describes. But generally,
Rob,
I think
hang on. Can you, for me, it's an oxymoron. What transcendental and absolute? How do those fit together? Transcendental means that it doesn't halt or doesn't it's not restricted to one single thing. It's just something that goes through a whole different variety of things, whatever that may be at the moment. And then if it is absolute, that just means that it is a fact in itself. There's nothing that you can do to falsify it or whatever. It just exists, and that is the way that it is. And so a transcendental absolute, in my eyes, does not make sense.
Yeah, I think he's using sort of other language as well. Transcendental, it transcends, our realm, for want of a better word, or the natural world, or whatever the case may be. But you could have something that's absolute that isn't transcendental as well. So what's the idea of adding transcendental? Because again, I think the mindset here is they're starting from the position of you have this transcendental being and they're working backwards. But the question to ask, if one wanted to ask that question, is, well, can something be absolute without being transcendental? And I think the answer is, of course, yes. Yeah. But the second question is, can morality be, quote, absolute, or, to use another word, objective, without transcendental? And of course, there are naturalists or non-believers in transcendentalism that feel there are objective morals, and then so there are naturalistic views of objective morals. So there are people making that claim. I'm not making that necessarily, but there are philosophers and others that do make that claim. So yeah, I don't see that transcendental has anything to do with it particularly, but I think his mindset is that it must be, that it can only be, or morals can only be absolute if they come from quote unquote something transcendental, i.e. not part of this world.
It's just a semantics thing. And what they mean to say is that God's word is binding on those who submit to his will.
Okay, but again, why is God's word binding?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
What is it about God that makes the word binding? Because ultimately, you're going to ask, well, if it's just the fact that he's powerful, well, that just means might makes right. If he's all knowing, does that mean that it's binding? Well, only if you choose to be. What is it that makes it a fact of the matter that his word is binding? And that's as you'll see shortly, that's the problem that they sort of collide with. And I'm not sure they're going to give a sufficient answer to that.
Okay.
But just to add to that, the concept really is that it's not from humans as a society or as a people or as
Yeah, it's
a
not
group.
subjective.
We don't decide what is morality. It's beyond us. It's transcendent, as brother was saying.
Okay, but I think you've got to be a bit careful there because he's just saying it's not from humans. Well, if aliens were to come that were far more advanced than us, that have been studying us for millennia, and could tell us what is moral based on some standard or other, would they be giving us objective morals? And presumably Imran would shift, and he added in the word transcendental at the end. Well, okay, so what is it about transcendental that makes it objective or makes it absolute as opposed to something that is non-human? Because he used the word non-human. So I would challenge him on the alien side, but immediately he would then have to shift the goalpost and say, no, I'm not talking about anything in this world. It must be transcendental.
But the thing is, you can hear already they're starting to dance around because they realize what is coming up is not going to go in their favor. So they're already starting to prepare to be as vague as possible so that they can go and swim to the nearest island and then claim, well, this is where I wanted to go all along. But that doesn't work. I mean, it's not that objective. It is not that absolute. It is not what you are calling morality. Morality is just a code of conduct, and that is it. What they are saying is morality is everything that comes from God. And that is the statement that they are trying to take, and that is the statement they're trying to protect. And that is silly, because exactly what you said, there are loads of different scenarios where you can show that this does not apply, or it can be even detrimental.
Correct. Okay, good.
Would you say it's independent of a mind? I think that's how most people define objective, that it's independent of opinion or a human mind or a mind in general.
Yeah, for human mind, yeah.
Mosster, can you just make your point, please?
That is
Oh.
the point.
So I'm just trying to understand. Before I even make a point, I don't want to talk over you because I could mean something by objective morality, and then
Say
you
what you
just
like. Make your
speak.
point. Just make your point.
Okay, so the point that he's trying to make that obviously Hamza isn't following, which is often the case, is he wants to define morality, he wants to understand what they mean by morality, so that hopefully he can get agreement with them, or he can put his view of morality and there can be some agreement, and then he can build from there. That's the point he's making. What do you guys mean by objective? And the reason I'm asking this is so that we can proceed, because I've heard this a lot, and I'm skeptical of this, or whatever the case may be. Right? That's the point at the moment. So he hasn't even put his argument yet. He wants to clarify a definition of something so that he can then put forward a view.
Which is the
I mean, I've seen this
right way.
Sorry?
Which is the obviously right way of doing things. You should always do that.
Yeah. You do want to clarify things so that you can make it, very easy for people to move forward. If you don't have that, then, it's very easy for people to go, well, I don't agree with that, or I didn't mean this, or whatever the case may be. And that's what you want to avoid at the very early stages, so
exactly.
that people don't sort of try and wander off a bit later
Right.
on when
Exactly. It's
there's
your
pressure being
foundation.
applied. Yeah.
You need to build your foundation before you go and build on it.
Yeah, that's something I've learned over time, is to make sure that you get agreement on certain basic ideas or definitions or whatever the case is, and then you can put forward your view or your case or your argument or whatever the case is. Yeah. Especially with some of these guys, I'm not going to name names, but some of these guys can become a bit slippery when there's some pressure applied, or there's some more nuanced critique leveled. If you don't get the definitions early that you can hold them, then they do become a bit slippery. So we want to that sort of stuff. We do want to have them in a place where they can't slide around. Not that that'll stop them, but at least then we can point out and refer them back to what we agreed before.
Underline it, don't worry.
I've seen this many times happen on your stream, and that's why I'm taking this line.
Yeah, no, it's good to clarify definitions. So
Okay.
But we're not going to clarify every single word as you go along.
Okay, sure. So how would you know what's moral or what's immoral?
Perfect.
So, for example, is drinking alcohol objectively immoral?
Okay, this is a beautiful question, and it's leading into something, Stops, and you might, because you already know what's going to happen here, but for the viewers, we're not going to spoil it, but this is leading in. So this is a beautiful leading in question about something like that, because presumably they have a view, so let's hear how they attempt to deal with this.
I would say
so I think we need to define perspectives here as to from whose point of view you're looking at. So do you believe in God?
No, come on, please. They are totally lost. And this is the beauty. If you ask a straight question, if you first do the definition, then you ask a question like this, which is very specific, and actually, you're limiting it. And you can see how totally confused they are. Like on the left, Hamza is saying, "Now, come on, we don't need to define every word." And then Hashim on the right says, "Listen, we need to define everything." So this is beautiful.
And did you notice as well, the other thing that's very telling, there was this awkward silence there.
Yeah.
And if you guys have been following specifically these guys, or at least some of these guys, right? Silence is like a huge indicator. If you're not used to these guys, then you might not notice it. But if you pay attention, right, they're talking nonstop, they interrupt incessantly. There's hardly ever a moment of silence. Or when there's a moment of silence, particularly when a question is asked by a non-Muslim or an interlocutor of theirs, that says a lot, right? It's like, ooh, we're not sure of this now. Why is he asking this? There's a whole lot of goings on very lightly in the mind here why you get this silence. But what Hashim has done here, of course, is done exactly the opposite. This is a dishonest tactic. I'm going to make it very clear and overt here. He doesn't realize that what this guy is doing, Mosster is doing, and it may be a small tip for Mosster as well, to pre-frame it up front so that you can avoid this and you can just bypass this, because this is going to waste a bit of time now. But what you can say is, hey, I'm going to be doing an internal critique. Hey guys, do you know what an internal critique is? They might say, yeah. If somebody's brave enough to say yes, then say, can you define it? If not, if they all stay silent because they're not prepared to say, I don't know something, then you can explain that an internal critique is me going into your model and saying, okay, let's look within Islam. Imagine I stepped into Islam for a moment. I accepted your presuppositions. I want to see whether this is internally coherent. In other words, does it follow? Does everything work? Is this substantial? And do you have good reasons for everything within your worldview? It doesn't matter what I believe. I could be a Buddhist, a Hindu, an atheist. I could be from Mars. I'm taking your view, your presuppositions, and I'm testing them internally. Now, if you say that
it's a hands-on test.
Correct.
Yeah.
Then it's irrelevant what my worldview is, right? But what's happened here is they had this awkward silence, and because they've all got these tactics, right? And it's almost like it's become for somebody like Hashim, it's become second nature, right? I'm now going to shift the burden, because in his mind, for you to even question their moral system, you've got to have a moral system from which you are questioning it. And in this particular case, you don't, right? Here, it doesn't matter what you believe. You could believe that torturing everybody to death is the best thing in the world. It's irrelevant, your position. What we want to know is, what do they believe about this? Is this wrong in their worldview, irrelevant of ours?
But the funny thing is, and it shows how they are geared, how they are immediately going onto a category, a specific script, because he introduced himself as an ex-Muslim. And now the next thing that Hashim asked is, do you believe in a God? What the hell does that have to do with anything? If anything is a red herring, this is, because it has absolutely nothing to do with the question. And that's why I'm laughing so hard, because this is what I call a reaction out of embarrassment. He cannot think of anything else and needs to react somehow, and this is his only go-to.
Yeah, it's a diversionary tactic. And,
Yeah.
I'm open to explaining it to people because they may not have realized this, whatever the case is. And if I can get agreement with them that it's irrelevant what my position is, then hopefully that question won't come up again. But hopefully, as we explained it here, people who are listening will understand that as well. So if somebody starts to question me about quote-unquote atheism, at no point, if they say, hey, what do you believe about X? Unless they're saying, from my point of view, you're wrong. The moment they say something like that, now it's different. Now I'm going to ask you, okay, what's the standard by which you're saying it's wrong from your point of view? But if they're asking me, I take it as an internal critique. They're saying, what about your worldview? They're looking at it. They're not saying, hey, I think you're wrong because I believe in God. They're just saying, why is this the case? I want to understand your position. So no response from me should be, well, hang on a moment. You can't even ask about my position until we check your position. No. That's incorrect, right? And that's what's happened here. And so, like I say, the tip for Mosster here is to talk about an internal critique or frame it up ahead of time so that you don't get these diversionary tactics.
Another thing I'd like to point out is in the chat at the bottom line, there's a Nick L. Now, this Nick L is really, this is, okay, I'm being nice. He is not the most coherent person. And look what he's doing. The first thing that he says, ask him how many rakats there are in Surah Al-Fatiha. Now, this is, I don't know why, this is the standard reaction by Muslims to somebody who says, I am an ex-Muslim, that they first need to test this ex-Muslim whether he really was a Muslim. Instead of just saying, well, okay, so who the fuck cares? They need to go and ask like really inane questions about Islam. And Thunder had to do that. He then recited Al-Fatiha because this is something that you learn. And that sort of satisfies them, or they carry on asking until they find something. You
Yeah.
don't know that, so you were not really a real Muslim. So why are you here as an ex-Muslim or something? He's just trying to clarify it. It doesn't really matter. He's just saying, look, I know about Islam. I've been there. I've been where you are now, and I understand where you are. And this is what bothered me when I was in your situation, and this is why I'm asking you. And that's it. And you don't need explanations and tests now to show and prove all sorts of things. Let it be and just go and just answer the questions. Just go with it.
Yeah.
That's irrelevant. I'm just trying to clarify what your position is.
Whom I'm speaking to. See, if I'm speaking to a child,
How does it matter who you're speaking to? Does your opinion depend upon who you're speaking to?
So maybe we should
Just pause there,
stop that.
Rob.
Just listen to what I'm saying.
Okay.
One thing I want to point out here, Muslim apologists do this a lot. They say, are you a child? Are you retarded? Are you demented? Are you 5 years old? Things like that. The best way to answer this is to say, well, look, then all it takes is for a child to come here and stump you that you don't know the answers to this thing. Because that is then going to make them look silly, that it only takes a retarded person to go and show that there's a problem in Islam. And that backfires them immediately, and they stop doing that, because I've seen that so many times.
Yeah, and he was very sharp there. He says it's irrelevant. And of course it is irrelevant. So kudos to Mosster at this point in time. It is irrelevant. They're not going to let the point go as A, maybe because they don't understand it, but B, even if they do understand it. The question was an excellent one. And they're now on the back foot. They've now got to think about this. So this is giving them breathing room. And again, it's showing why somebody like Hashim is not a good interlocutor for these sort of things. Let him stick to challenging the Christians on the Trinity. That's his broken record. But when it comes to these sort of things, he's out of his depth. And the response he's going to give now is, of course, asinine. So let's listen in.
You're getting a lot of thumbs down in the chat, mate. Be careful.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking you is because we need to know how to approach the questioner based on what he believes or she believes.
No, that's totally wrong. All you have to do is accept that they understand rational arguments and logical arguments, and you need to present it. That's the only presupposition you need to give. It doesn't matter what they believe about something. What matters is, how do you know, which is the question that was asked, whether drinking is wrong or not? What is the standard by which you can say this is wrong, or is it objectively wrong? That's all there is to it, right? And somebody that understands English and follows that logic, that's all you need. You don't need to understand whether he believes in a God or what his position is. It's totally irrelevant.
Yeah, and look at the threat and look at the level of well, intellectual, whatever you want to call it, Hamza is showing here by saying, well, I don't understand the question. I'm going to keep quiet, but I'm just going to increase the pressure by saying other people don't understand it and are giving you a thumbs down. So if you don't now immediately appease us in some way, I'm going to kick you because there are too many thumbs down from the chat, who obviously don't like the question because they realize it's putting these guys against the ropes. So it's rigged. The whole thing is rigged.
Yeah. I think we've got to be realised that Hamza is terribly biased against anybody here. He's going with the chat. He and the chat are most of them are simpletons. They don't really understand the nuance here and don't want to. As soon as it becomes more nuanced, even with a discussion recently that I heard, I think it was with Hijab in part 6 of his thing, he wanted to cut it short, right? Hijab was in the flow, and so was the other guy, whoever he was speaking to, and he wanted to cut it short, presumably because he wasn't following along. He thought it was boring or whatever the case is. So he's not a great moderator, unfortunately, but that's par for the course. You know, if one were to have a discussion or a debate with him or one of these guys, you do it on something like Modern Day Debates, a more neutral channel where this sort of moderation and heckling content, because it's a one-way heckle, by the way. It's not that it can happen both ways either. So that's the other downside of this.
Can you see this on the screen?
No, I'm looking at the video. I'm running the main video here.
Thank you for that.
So if a child asks me a question, I will not answer in a philosophical way, which is quite difficult for the child to understand. Not saying that you're a child, but the thing is, it gets quite muddy when you don't know yourself where you stand, or for us to approach you in a way which is more meaningful as a conversation as a whole. So if you're going
What
to
did
believe
he
in
just
God,
say?
then we can approach it in a different way. If you say, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, then we'll approach it in that, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you can approach it in a sense that I don't
Based on your
confirm or
belief.
deny
When
the
you ask
I don't
what do
confirm
you
or deny the existence of God.
Yeah, I think he again, Mosster, if you're listening to this, then I think you did well the first time. Stick on that and say what you said there is irrelevant, and here's the why. Here's why it's relevant. I'm asking you what you guys believe, right? I want to understand your position. Whatever my position about God is irrelevant. I can accept for the sake of the discussion that you believe in a God and you think it's X, Y, and Z. I'm asking you specifically about this question, and I want to follow a line of questioning here. As long as I accept that there's a rational argument, I can understand English, etc., that's all we need for the moment, because it's irrelevant to this. The moment I do an external, or I say something, but from my view I think it's wrong, then you are justified to say, well, what about your view? Why should I accept your view, or something like that? But as long as he's not doing that, he's simply asking questions of you guys, the Muslims, then your critique is completely irrelevant. So I think he's now going to answer this question, unfortunately, but I think he needs to stay, and he will do it again in the future, but I think he needs to stay focused on answering the question, because these are red herrings. And if you've watched a few of these, you'll know that this happens, and you've got to be laser focused on your question. Either you just ignore it and go back to the panel, which they won't like, right? Because then it looks like you're ignoring him, which you should actually do. Or you quickly nip it in the bud by saying, hey, this is the reason I'm not answering that, so let's get back to the question.
You don't believe in God.
I don't believe in it, but so far as the ontological claim, I neither confirm or deny.
Okay,
So you could say I'm an agnostic atheist.
You don't believe in God. That's it. Standard. There's no ifs or buts here.
Okay, and
Well,
so
belief is one thing and knowledge is the other. So you could be agnostic and you could still be atheist.
But do you believe in God or not?
No.
Right, that's it. So it's easy answer, isn't it? No, I don't believe in God. That's fantastic. So when you're asking for objective morality based upon what? We just said objective morality comes from God. You don't believe in God. So I'm not quite sure.
That's why I'm asking you the question. My question is very simple. I don't know why this is so convoluted.
Because you're not asking it.
How do you, in your worldview, how do you define if something is good or bad? Is drinking alcohol good or bad?
All right. So first of all, establish the principle. First, establish the principle.
Muslims is pretty clear. You need to understand. You're asking Muslims. For us, the answer is very clear. For us, what is halal and what is haram, what is permitted and what is forbidden is declared or stipulated by Allah and His Messenger.
That's not the question.
So is it objective?
I'm saying that's not the question. They don't understand it. They are unable to go back a step and understand what the question actually is and what it is related to. It is not, does it say in the Quran something or other, and therefore he is saying, how do you take this and why do you interpret this as being something correct, when in the Quran it says that alcohol is, the problem is that alcohol is a very bad example, because alcohol on the one hand has benefits and it's not actually mentioned as alcohol. You can also say they're talking about prayer. So
yeah, but Stops, there's a good reason why. You haven't watched it, but there's a good reason why he goes with alcohol. So that'll become apparent very shortly. Whether you want to, question the word alcohol or whatever, but there's a reason why he does go along that route. And so I think
because I wouldn't use it I wouldn't use it. But the thing is, what I'm seeing here is that the people are so bent on explaining the Quran, which he is not questioning. He is questioning their personal interpretation of why it is that they are accepting this.
Yeah, he's just asking whether it's objective. Now, again, remember what I said at the beginning. You need to be very clear on what objective means here. Is it mind independent? Is it a fact of the matter? Can facts change or are they unchanging? Right? And that's very relevant here. So, Mosster, if you're listening again, so with these sort of things, especially if you're speaking to guys like this and you know that there's going to be, all kinds of things happening, it's good to set up questions. When I've got a clear outcome that I want to get to when I'm speaking to a Muslim, I'm gonna ask certain questions to clarify in the beginning, so that we can proceed. And so if something like this happens, we can immediately go back and say, hang on, you said that objective means mind independent of mind, and it's a fact of the matter that is unchanging. Is that what you still hold to that, or whatever the case is? Once you've clarified that, because if you do it later on, then because then they can see that something's happening here, and they can see that they're going to get pushed into a corner, and now you get all kinds of equivocation and tactics coming on. So what you want to do is clarify these points before they get defensive and the tactics start to take hold. So you want to get it early in, where you've had a nice intro and all that sort of stuff, get clear on that, and then you can start to challenge them here. I think so. Getting that clarity with the objective in the beginning is important, and especially with something like it's a fact of the matter and it's unchanging. Had you said those two things and got them to agree on it, then this line of questioning would have been even more good or more solid. It's a good line of questioning, but I think they're going to dance a little bit, and Hashim is doing a part of that now.
Objectively wrong to drink alcohol.
We consider that to be the objective morality. What Allah has made halal and what He has made forbidden is something we consider objectively wrong. So, for example, alcohol is a very good example. What do you think is moral or immoral based on your worldview?
Okay,
That's
again,
not the question.
Exactly. So when you hear a question at the end, you just ignore that. And it's like you didn't hear that, right? One way to do that is go, okay, great. So what you said is objective, and you carry on with that. You ignore the question, right? Because this guy is shifting it here. He doesn't want to be, so he should have rather kept quiet, let Yusuf or somebody else do it. But he piped up. And so now he's in the hot seat. And so to get out of the hot seat, it's tag a question on the end, and then get you to start answering a line of questioning so that he doesn't have to go any further, right? Because this is a superficial answer, and there's a lot of problems with it, as we'll see. So just ignore the question and just continue as if he didn't say that part, and just answer on with what he responded to you with. That's the best way to avoid having to answer anything. Just carry on with that, because you're doing a line of questioning. Don't get sidestepped.
Well, I don't think it's immoral.
Why not?
Well, that's subjective, though, isn't it?
Exactly.
You're asking about objectivity, and now you're giving us your subjective opinion.
So this is where I'm getting at, is because what you're defining objective morality is really on the whims of your God. So, for example, God allowed drinking alcohol.
On the whims of
Okay, so one quick thing here again. And it's easy to do, Mosster, and it's fine. These are tweaks, right? So something that you can take on board here. I think you're doing a fairly good job. And it's just tweaking a few of these things. So if you run this again with other Muslims, you just tweak a few things and it'll be even more powerful. They're gonna now burn a lot of fuel here about the word whims. What you could say, is it the desires of God? Right? Does God have desires? Clearly he does, in that he desired the universe, humans, etc., etc. Unless you think it's necessarily the case. If they understand the implications of that, they're never going to go down that route. So does God have desires? So these are God's desires, right? If you say it that way, it's very hard for them to argue. But if you say the word whims, it just sounds like, God rolled out of bed metaphorically and just decided that. In fact, he did do that. But the word whims allows them to go off on this because they associate it with just like something arbitrary, like flipping a coin or whatever the case may be. So maybe in future just say the word desires. Does God have desires? What this really means is that it's subject to God's desires, which seem to be able to change over time or whatever the case may be. That way it's harder for them to get away from it, as you'll see now.
Well, stop.
Yes, I'll tell you why.
Okay,
I'll tell
before
you
you start speaking about alcohol,
arbitrary.
before you start speaking, there you go. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to mute him.
No, I meant to mute him. This is the typical thing. He doesn't have any arguments, and because he doesn't have any arguments, he has to apply censorship. So he tries to mute him, and in the process of muting him, he's too silly to, because he's so excited to mute him that he actually kicks him out. This is the problem. They cannot go and accept that somebody can speak. They cannot accept that they are talking on top of each other, that somebody else is able to voice their opinion. They don't let you finish. They always interrupt. Always, always, always. I've never had, 99% the ability to speak to somebody because they're constantly interrupting. And I don't understand why they're doing that.
It's a defense mechanism. And it's also a case of, hey, if you let somebody speak for too long, it sounds like they're making a good argument, and the audience, because these guys are very fine-tuned to the audience that are listening, right? This isn't about getting to truth. This isn't, in my view, them being intellectually honest, although they will dispute this. This is about how well do they look and sound, and how well do they think the argument is coming across to the audience. And so that's the primary concern. How do we sound here? So if we interrupt, it means like we think that it shows that we recognize there's a fault here, and we're not going to let that go. And if the guy speaks too long, it sounds like we might be agreeing with him. So all of that happens. He does bring him back here now, but let's just let this part go because they think it's all a big joke here now. But as you say, it's the fact that he's too quick on the moderation button, right? As soon as they interrupt, they can interrupt incessantly. He won't do anything. But as long as the other person interrupts, suddenly he's got a very low tolerance. So he's very biased and inconsistent with this moderation. And that's a bad thing, right? You want to moderate. You actually want somebody on here who's a Christian or a Hindu or somebody that doesn't take any sides, right? That would be a lot better. But hey, this is the sort of safe space that they like, where they're in control. When there's 3 or 4 or 5 of them against one person, they feel a lot more comfortable that way, because now one of them is going to save the other one, or at least one of them can interrupt, and they can control it a lot better. This is all about control. This is not about an intellectually honest conversation.
That's the way to get. You got that button. Just press the button, they're out.
To be honest with you, bro, there was a lot of thumbs down, man. The crowd weren't happy.
No, come back on and we'll have that
Oh,
discussion, because this is why I gave the definition of not being from humans. We do not decide. Which is, obviously, he was clearly someone who didn't believe in a creator. So it really was, now he was going to give his opinion as to what he thinks is right.
No, he wasn't. He answered it mistakenly because Hashim tagged a question on you. Just ignore that question, because this is the result of answering the question. They then go down the route, oh, well, it's just subjective. We don't have to answer you. And off it goes down a tangent, because they're unsophisticated. They don't realize this is an internal critique. They're not prepared to answer it, because actually if they answered it, if they were, better informed on this, they could answer it, and then their guys might have an argument. But because they're not, the way to do this is to dogpile and to tag questions on, and then get the other person to say something that you can switch the burden around and start asking them. This is a common, as you said, tactic. Hashim invoked it, and in future you just ignore something like that and you carry on. I'll stress that multiple times. It's just so important not to allow that to happen.
Right or wrong. And then the avenue to go down is, well, okay, if other people thought it was wrong, would you agree with them? Or, you can show the inconsistency in the subjective view. And that would have been probably the way to sort of, I would have
All right,
discussed.
so I've let him go. Just 1 second, Frank. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah,
I meant to mute you. When someone's speaking,
I understand.
Because you want to complain about talking over each other, then you start talking over. Yeah?
Sorry,
So
I'm sorry if
your
I did
whole
that.
premise-
I apologize.
Oh, no problem. Your whole premise, you came on here, you asked about objectivity. And then you start giving your subjective feelings and opinions. Now, we told you where we get our objective opinion from. Yeah? A transcendent creator. That's what we believe.
And I want to develop that line of questioning, if you allow me.
Right, so you understand that principle first.
Nice. That's a nice way of putting it. And I want to develop that line of questioning, if you'll allow me. I think that's a good way, because now the onus is on them. Are they going to allow this to happen? Because remember, this is all about how they look to their gullible audience. If they don't allow the line of questioning, then it appears as if they have something to hide, or they're uncertain or unhappy about being questioned. So I like the way that he phrased that. It's a very non-confrontational way, but there is an inference there, sort of a hidden inference, and it will appeal to these guys who want to look good to their audience.
Yeah, very good.
Well, first of all,
Noted.
yeah?
Yes, I understand the principle. So basically,
Right,
is it fair to
fantastic.
say that you believe in the divine command theory? That whatever God ascribes is moral, and whatever he says is bad is immoral, correct? The belief that what's moral and what's immoral is commanded by the divine. Is that what your position is?
Yes.
With nuances, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the divine command theory. Is that fair?
Excuse me?
Yeah.
What did he just say? He just said, yes, this is the divine command theory. We accept this with nuances. Who decides what the nuances are?
Yeah, I think that's a throw. I just ignore Imran at this point. Again, I'd be focused on somebody like Yusuf. If I knew these guys, I wouldn't be bothering with anybody else. I'd try and focus on it. But they wouldn't allow that. But that's where I try and focus. I just ignore that part. You're right. You could go down all that rabbit hole, but I think he's got a much more sort of better line of questioning that's coming up. So hopefully he doesn't, if I remember correctly, go down that. Just ignore that. Like you say,
They're
you could do it.
contradicting one
Stop
another. He just said it's absolute, and now he's saying no, it's not. It's nuances. So it's human
No, well,
nuances
you could
that
say
are
it's-
being applied there. So
Well, you could say it's absolute, but the nuances apply to what I mean by this and blah blah blah, right? So, but I just think it's a throwaway comment that we shouldn't burn fuel on. It's irrelevant. It's a trivial point at this moment in time. Especially if he's got a line of questioning, I think he shouldn't be sidetracked with that sort of stuff,
No,
unless the guy
Rob,
makes an obvious thing.
what I'm trying to show here is how insecure these guys actually are with questions like this. where there should be one consistent, one line, one sort of, there should be a focus in one direction only. And even here, with these 5 guys, we already see differences. And this is the funny thing that we see in Islam all the time, that there is no consistency, there is no straight line, there is no, one sort of, I don't know what to call it, one line of reasoning, and then it is consistent. It is not. And this is why we see the one guy says it's absolute, the other guy says there's nuances, nobody really knows, and everything is vague and down to interpretation. So you cannot ever go in Islam and say, well, this is absolute and this is the way that it is. Nothing is. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So then how do you deal with the Euthyphro's dilemma in your worldview? Where
Totally
are
different.
good actions good because God commands them? Or are good actions commanded by God because they're good?
So
I do find it amusing that Hamza here is laughing about this.
Yeah.
I think he's probably still absolutely clueless about this. Now, Yusuf is going to have a go at this, and I don't think it's a particularly good go.
But Yusuf
there is
didn't
also
understand it
smiles.
the last time.
Yeah, and I still don't think he does. But I think it's very telling that he would laugh about this, right? This is a serious critique in academia, in philosophy, etc. I watched the video, and I've actually copied a lot of the video down about the 2 philosophers. I think it's Jeremy Koons and William Lane Craig. So these guys are at the highest levels of philosophy, at least on theist and atheist side, right? The very highest level, and they are talking about this. This is not a laughing matter. The fact that you are so ignorant about it makes you laugh about it. But if you really understood what was going on, it's not a laughing matter. And professional philosophers are talking about this in nuance, in depth. So clearly, it's not a done for.
Yeah, but the last time they didn't even know about this. So did they now look this up and did they find some Christian apologetics, or why are they laughing? Because if I remember correctly, Christians have tried to explain this and have failed, because they come up with this middleman and they're saying, well, it's neither of the two, when actually it is. Because if you take the statement that they are then proposing, if you then apply Euthyphro's dilemma again to this, you have the same problem all over again. So Christians have tried to answer this for so many times.
Yeah, we'll come to that shortly. So hold on to that thought, because we'll need to go into that a little bit
is that
more.
where they're going? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll come there momentarily.
So I would say the Euthyphro dilemma is a false dilemma, and that the fact that because it posits these 2 distinctions, and the issue with it is that so if you say things are good because God decrees they are good, then the non-believer would then retort and use words that you did. Words like wins. And the thing is with wins, if we define it,
again, you see, that's why it's good not to use that sort of language. It's what in the philosophy, as far as I've heard at least, it's about it being arbitrary, i.e. that whatever God decides, if he has desires, then those desires are arbitrary desires. They're not based on anything. If it's from his nature, then it's just arbitrary, whatever he decides. So you've got to be careful with the word worms. With this lot, you've got to be very careful, because if you use a wrong word, or a word that is that allows them some leeway, they're going to jump on that, go down that tangent, try to win a trivial point, so that they don't have to deal with it with a more powerful critique here. And again, Stops did it recently. I think when you see that happening, just retract it. It's a trivial point. You're not losing anything by doing it. Don't try and hold to something that's trivial. So he could, at this stage, if he wanted to, say, okay, what I didn't mean whims. I mean, it's God's desires. You happy with that? Because I don't want you guys to go down the road of whims and start looking up a dictionary definition of whims and starting to disagree with that, and then making as if you've made some sort of substantial point. You haven't, right? So I think when it'll happen to all of us, if we catch ourselves saying something like that, because it's so easy to volunteer information, and these guys will jump on it. So you've got to become strict at not volunteering information. If you say a wrong word, then just give it back and say, hey, I withdraw that. What I mean is X, right? Are you happy with that? Then we don't need to go to I want to know about X, right? I don't want to have you go in the dictionary and then try and go off in that tangent.
This word doesn't match at all into our conception of God. So a sudden...
Okay, so you can see here he's becoming more and more inculcated with this Muslim idea, it doesn't fall within our idea. So if you use a word that they either don't like or is not that isn't synonymous with something that they clearly understand, then it doesn't fall within our idea, and they want to reject it immediately. Right? So he's becoming more inculcated, because he could go, okay, whim, what do you mean by whim? If I'm charitable, you probably mean God's desires or whatever the case is. Okay, let's talk about that. Right? But that's not the case here. So we can slowly start to see what's happening, even with Yusuf, unfortunately.
Desire or change of mind, especially one that is unusual or unexplained.
But it is unexplained, right? Nobody can explain why God has desires. And I'm not sure if even God could explain why he has those desires. What is it based on? Is it, again, because all God's going to say is based on some other arbitrary property or attribute or desire, whatever the case may be. So it is unexplained, at least to us, if not to God himself, right? So that part is certainly not untrue, it seems to me.
And that's why he's asking
And-
why. He's not asking what, he's asking why.
Well, he's basically saying Yusuf is characterizing it as, if you take this horn, then it's seen as whimsical. Actually, like I say, what the view is that it's arbitrary, that it's not based on some foundation that other than God's desires, which are seemingly arbitrary. And if they're not, what's the argument that they are non-arbitrary? And that would then mean that God has certain desires that he would have to have, right? It's like you take a necessitarian view, that it's necessary for God to have these particular desires. And that's a whole, and I'm not an expert on that, but you go down a massive wormhole there. So if God has desires, and he could have had different desires, then what are those desires based on? And if they're arbitrary, then that's exactly what this horn of the Euthyphro dilemma is pointing to, that he has these desires, and he could have had a different desire. And if he had a desire that rape was a good thing, well then, by your lights, if you take this horn, that's what you would have to accept. And
Then
that's
it's
kind of
valid.
what Mosster will say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this idea, it's kind of tied to this idea of emotions or randomness or, without reason, which isn't necessarily the case. And
Okay, that's a good point, right? He said without reason. I'm going to jump in there and say, okay, you said without reason. So, Yusuf, can you explain to me, if we replace whims with desires or whatever the case may be?
Which he did.
Then what is the reason that God has particular desires? And if he's honest, he's going to say, I have no idea. And I
It's
said to him,
arbitrary, exactly.
do you think God has an idea? And if he does, are those desires based on some other arbitrary desires? Or is there some sort of foundation that God could present to us such that he could show that his desires are not arbitrary? And I'm not sure they could do that. All they could do is say what he's going to say shortly, but that opens up to a further critique, which we'll get to.
with regards to the other one, whether God says things are good because they are good, independently of whether or not God says them, this then tries to posit this idea that morality is like a force that acts on God, or if you kind of go down that line of reasoning, it ends up taking you towards this the idea of logic limiting, quote unquote, limiting God.
No,
And again,
it makes God obsolete. That's all it does.
Yeah, all it says is that there's something external to God by which God is measuring his standard, in which case, we wouldn't need a God if we could appeal directly to that
Exactly.
standard. God is irrelevant, right?
It's so
None of
easy.
them will take that view, and the divine command theorists won't take that view. They will take the other horn of the dilemma, which is that it's good because God says so. Well, okay, how does that make it good? And then that's why he's saying it's a false dilemma, and he is going to attempt to borrow from the Christians here by claiming there's this third option
is
at the
he?
moment. Yeah. And we'll deal with that when it comes up, because I think that doesn't actually get you out of it, as we'll
I
see.
like the way Stops
This kind of-
tries to sound critical. Okay, I'm
Imagine-
just reading in the chat something. I like the way Stops tries to sound critical with that tone of voice. Lol.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what that is. Okay, Gary. Just
Assumes logic and morality as if it's some sort of force like gravity, or if it's something that's acting externally to God upon him.
what
And
is
we don't
gravity?
see
What are you
things
talking
like that.
about?
No, okay, it's just misspeaking. I think what he's really
This is silly.
meaning to be saying, God is, if you take that horn of the dilemma, then God, as we've just said, God is subject to a standard that's outside of himself, and they're not going to accept that God is subject to some other standard outside of God. That's all he's saying. He's wording
Rob,
it poorly, though.
He's just saying that God is not in control of everything, that gravity is above God. Is this
No,
what
no, he's
Ethan
using
said?
gravity as an example, but it's a bad example. Yeah, I mean,
Very bad.
he's not speaking very clearly here at this moment in time.
Definitely
But he's
not.
trying to make the example that it's like you're subject to something. Well, if that is the view, though, God is subject to something that is outside of God. That's how God knows something is good.
When we're talking about good or what is goodness, we're talking about this is contained within God's essence. And so
Oh my
it's not
God.
something that's outside of him restricting him, like gravity restricts you, or like the legal system restricts you in terms of the police and the way they deal with you. So the whole Euthyphro dilemma goes down this route of this very strange understanding of God, basically.
No, it's not.
No.
I think, and this is again
Opposite.
maybe more theology on your point or a bit more study. This is entirely consistent with your God. If you believe that your God is all good, and if you're not going to accept that, I think then you're going to be in a world of problems. And if you're going to shoehorn or you're going to confine yourself to the words that the Quran uses, you've got to be very careful, because if you're going to use that standard, we can hold you to that, but then you can't make other valid inferences based on what the Quran does not say. So I think it's entirely valid, and your God is subject to this, in this case, the same sort of this dilemma, just like the Yahweh God. The fact that it's not brought up in your theology in these terms doesn't mean that you can say it's strange or it's whatever. It's a valid inference to draw from the claims that you guys make about your God. And if you don't make those claims, you actually are, depending on what claims you are going to make, it's going to be as bad, if not worse, if you're going to try and go some other route. So I think more study in theology and or this particular Euthyphro dilemma, because you'll see it applies precisely to your God, just like it does to Yahweh or any other sort of transcendental
Exactly.
type of absolute authority that people are claiming to appeal to.
And I like how the others are keeping very, very
when you-
quiet.
Yeah, I think because they think he's studied some philosophy, so they'll let him run with it. I think maybe this is the first time he's tried to do it, especially when he's answering somebody else. So let's give him, let's be charitable and say that he's just a bit nervous or whatever the case is. But he's certainly not articulating it in a clear and concise way. I would be happy to say that.
You start referring to whims, which is a very anthropomorphic way of looking at God. And it sort of tries to make a comparison between, say, like how I have a whim. Like when I just decide something on a whim, I'm just like, oh yeah, whatever, we'll go for this. Why? I don't know. I just felt like it. This isn't how we understand God. When God's making a decision, it's not just random. It's not that there isn't wisdom in it. And it's
Okay, I think he's sort of rambling a bit here, but the question can be asked to him. Okay, if you're saying that God doesn't just decide it on a whim, well then what is the basis for God making a decision?
Exactly.
And he might say, oh, because of his nature. Well, that doesn't really answer the question. I mean, I'm making a decision based on my nature, right? If I was a bad person, I'd have a whim, i.e. based on my nature, of doing something harmful to somebody else. If I'm a good person, I'll have a whim that's based on my particular nature. So that, again, that's just arbitrary. So even if you go down that route, so how is God different from human beings in this case? And if he is, how do you know that's the case? And what's the standard by which God, chooses his desires or his whims? And that would be a much harder question for him to answer. And I think and I'm asking now, maybe he'll listen to this, he'll have a think about it. But and obviously Mosster's being very polite here, letting him sort of ramble away here.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
it's not a clear, concise response in any way.
But one thing that we need to also take into consideration here, I think that Yusuf is talking absolute nonsense, because if we look at the bigger picture, if we go like into helicopter view, we need to appreciate that this God allowed humans to create alcohol. He set up, as a creator, the ability to create alcohol. He made available the specific chemical construct of alcohol and the effect it has on the brain. Then he goes and leaves it for hundreds of thousands of years for people to drink alcohol, and it is a whim that suddenly he decides, well, actually, no. Now I've created something that is not so good. So I've created mayhem, and I've created inebriation. I've created all sorts of things which I now need to take back. I need to regulate something that I created, which I didn't know that it was going to be negative. And now I have to fix my own mistake by suddenly going and saying, well, it's not so good. The other thing is, this creator God says you're not allowed to drink alcohol. but there's an entire cloud of alcohol, I don't know, 3.5 light years away from us. So why create all this alcohol? And then it tells people not to drink alcohol here on earth. And if you don't do that, you get rewarded by drinking alcohol in heaven. So this is totally crazy. So going it's against the nature of God is totally nonsensical if you consider all the reality, if you're looking at it from helicopter view.
And it's not that there's something external to him pressuring him. His goodness is within his essence, and the laws, they come from there. They don't come from something external. They come from him. And
so what point
there isn't anything beyond him that's limiting him in any way.
Blah, blah, blah. This is claims,
and so,
claims,
like
claims,
I say,
claims.
for this reason, I look at the Euthyphro dilemma as a false dilemma.
Okay, so yeah, that was sort of a very
frustrating,
unstructured kind of response. I'm going to say it now, but we can always do it later, right? And here's what the philosopher Jerry, I think it's Jeremy Coons, says about this, right? If you say that God wills something because He is good, which is kind of the unlettered way of which Yusuf was trying to get to and wasn't sort of very clear and concise about it. Well, then the question becomes: are the good-making properties of God good because God possesses them, or does He possess them because they are good? Right, so that's the question to ask if somebody claims that God wills something because He is good. So then the Euthyphro dilemma is slightly reworded, as we've just said, and I'll repeat it again so that people can hear it, note it, write it down, whatever. Are the good-making properties of God good because God possesses them, or does He possess them because they are good? And we are right back to the same dilemma that is there. So this idea that you have this third option is in fact an illusion, because the option would only be a valid third option if it didn't fall prey to exactly the same question. And of course, as we've seen there, it falls prey to exactly the same question. So, and there is a much more nuanced discussion that these guys aren't aware of, but it still doesn't get you out of this. And so that's the question that we can ask, even if we were to go with this idea that it's God's nature, that He is good. We just ask this question, and back they go to the same problem. So, Mosster, if you're listening, stop it, rewind it, make a note of this question. And if you ever get this again, then you can ask this question. Come straight from Jeremy Coons, the philosopher who's very critical and who is an expert in the Euthyphro dilemma specifically. And he's at the highest level of academic study.
If I just emphasize that point very briefly, if you read throughout the Quran, you see this phenomena happening where Allah describes a scenario or a command, or He'll give you a thing to do or to avoid. And He'll say, for example, I'll give an example, and do justice. And then Allah emphasizes, because I am the just. Or He'll say, show mercy to, such and such people, because I am the merciful. And you'll see this pattern of speaking where Allah associates things that are good and positive, or actions that He's asked to do, with His nature, which is why Brother Yusuf was talking about it, the morality is essentially that which fits with the nature of the Creator, which is why we're giving these commands. So it's an arbitrary, the Euthyphro dilemma is actually an arbitrary dichotomy that doesn't actually necessarily have to be there.
Okay, so unfortunately Imran is completely uninformed or misinformed if we're being charitable about this. It's a significant thing. It's not an arbitrary. It is in fact a true dichotomy, even to the point where these Christians and now Muslims are trying to get out of this, because the same applies to their third option. There is no other option if you're going to, if you're clear on what objective means in the beginning. And appealing to the Quran doesn't help you. You're just begging the question against the other, somebody else's view. So telling us what the Quran says, all that means is you're appealing to the book, which God says is good. We want to know, is it objective, and how do we establish that? So talking about the Quran here at this moment in time, completely irrelevant. You need to argue and show us why it's not one of these. And Yusuf, I don't think in his sort of unlettered response there, kind of alluded to it, but he didn't give it in any way substantial. And the question that I've just posed, or Jeremy Coons rather than me, would just take you straight back there. And then I think they wouldn't really have any substantial response to that anyway.
And that's been answered actually really well in lots of different places online. So you don't have to take our word for it, even you can go and look and find out.
Okay, that's a vacuous response. Anybody could say that about anything, right? As soon as I hear that, because again, you can go down. when you're speaking to these guys, you've got to make a decision in your head. What do I do? Do I go down and challenge that particular vacuous? That's a vacuous statement. I can make it, but that's just going to elicit them to try and defend the vacuous statement, and maybe other people jump in. Or do I just ignore that and go back to the question? Because if you're going to stay laser focused on the question, that sort of irrelevant or trivial points or vacuous statements, it's just like a sidelight. They think they're saying something substantial, but in fact they're saying nothing substantial at all. And if you go down that line, you're allowing yourself again to be taken off in a different tangent. So it's up to you at this stage, if you're an interlocutor, do I deal with that? If it was just him, then you'd have to. But if there's other people, Yusuf is the guy to deal with here, because he's given a response. He's kind of read a little bit about it, presumably from the Christians or whatever the case is, but he's in no way made it very clear enough. And there is a substantial response to that, the claim that it isn't a true dichotomy. But Imran's thing we can just ignore there, unless we want to get sidetracked onto that line of quote unquote thinking.
Okay, just a quick remark on the tactic, that if somebody asks something, they go and they say, this has been answered, as though somebody saying something about it somehow refutes or rebuts or anything. It does not. It doesn't matter whether it's inheritance error or something. They'll say, yeah, this has been answered. It hasn't. Just because somebody said something does not mean that it's now clear that we have been shown to be wrong. No, somebody made a stupid mistake and made it even worse or something. But just because he said something does not mean that now we don't need to talk about this anymore. Just because exactly this has been answered. Well, yeah, somebody has talked about it, but they haven't given a sufficient answer to address this in any way that this dilemma is no longer a dilemma. It is as valid as it has been for the last 1,000 years. So there's nothing that you can do about it just by saying, yeah, somebody's talked about it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and that's often what Muslims do, as we've seen with the inheritance error and other errors in the Quran. Hey, go watch this video. Hey, go look at this link. As the question to ask here, right? This is the way I've now decided to deal with this: is say to the person, what have you read or watched the video or read the blog post? Can you summarize what it says and why you think it is true, or why you accept it? This will tell me whether they've listened to, read it or whatever, understand it, and can tell me why they accept it. If they don't do this, I just ignore it, because this is a diversionary tactic. This is, like you say, Imran's just done this. We hear it all the time. It used to happen in Speaker's Corner. Yes, here's a view that's been answered online. These guys did it with James, as we saw in the previous review, when James brought them the inheritance error that they had no answer to. Hey, but Adnan and Hijab have answered this, as if, like you saying, them uttering some sentences is some sort of substantial rebuttal that means that it's closed, the matter is closed. No, it's not, right? That this misunderstanding or this false idea that because somebody's uttered some words, this has been answered in some substantial way and they can just forget about it. No, that's if you want to be intellectually lazy and bordering on being disingenuous. No, it isn't. If you think it's an answer, go and get an answer, come and tell us what the answer is and why you accept it. Now we have something to discuss, but don't tell us that there's been an answer there. Then you go find it. It's your responsibility. If you're making a claim there's an answer, go and find it and bring it forward. It's your claim. I don't think there's an answer. I'm skeptical there's an answer. You go and find us the answer and tell us about it. So
yes,
again, it's whether you want to go down this route, right? You can just ignore this, or you say, okay, you've made the claim, go find the best answer on the internet, because you're claiming these answers are all out there. Go find it, read it, come back and tell me why you think it's a good answer. Off you go. And cheers.
And catch 22, yes. Just because Penrose said something doesn't mean it's true. Correct. Just for once, this is the first time that I see something that you say that is correct. That is absolutely true.
I know.
If I could just say one thing, I agree with Brother Yusuf and Dr. Imran. We don't imagine morality to be something independent of God. We can only know good if God declares it as such. And so I think the presupposition you're coming with is that truth is something which exists whether or not God was in the picture to begin with. But in our worldview, truth can only exist because of God.
Why?
Okay, so he's misunderstood the position here. Again, it's the Euthyphro dilemma, my friend, and he's asking you, which horn do you take? You either take this one or that one. He's explained what they are, and Yusuf has explained the difference. So you are now saying, well, okay, the other guy, Mosster, he's taking the other horn. He's not taking a horn. He's saying, hey, here's the dilemma that I notice from your position. Which horn are you taking? So it's not a case that he has to accept one or other. You guys have to accept one or other horn or try to claim that there's a third option. It's got nothing to do with what he believes about the dilemma. He's pointing out that this is a dilemma, and you guys have got to respond to it. Now, you could say, okay, well, we don't accept the second horn, or you could try and make up this third option if you like. But what you can't say is that, hey, you think it's this way. He's not saying he thinks it's that way. So don't misrepresent his position. He doesn't have a position on this. You guys do.
So if you look at it from that perspective, I hope you understand why it's a false dilemma, or why Yusuf made that claim in the first place. It's not either or. When you have to, once you put it into perspective that the brothers have, you can't have that dilemma in the first place, because we can't assume that something is independent of God.
Okay, he's clueless here. He doesn't understand what the dilemma is at all. So again, when you're talking to these guys, just think to yourself: do I need to deal with that vacuous response, or am I going to try and press the point with the Euthyphro dilemma with somebody like Yusuf? Because the other guys, both Imran and this other guy, have demonstrated from their response that they really don't understand the what's going on with this dilemma, or why it's a dilemma, right? So it's up to you what to do. I think if you went with either of these two guys, you're going to be sidetracked off. The best bet, in my view, here at this moment in time, if I was Mosster, is to just stick with Mosster, with Yusuf, and just say, okay, Yusuf, let's just get back to it. This is what you said. It's like you can ignore it totally. Now, if they get their back up about, hey, you're just ignoring everything we said, I could just say, well, I just don't think you've responded at all. Both of your responses are vacuous. You don't understand the dilemma, and that's evident by what you said. There is clearly a dilemma. This has been around for years. Even Yusuf understands that there is these two options. He's trying to claim that there's a third option. That's what I want to, pursue, and just leave these other guys out of it. Otherwise, it's like heckling. What they're actually doing here is just heckling, because they don't understand it. They're standing on the sideline, and because there's 4 or 5 of them, they can't sit still for long enough and let it go with 2 people. So they've got to essentially heckle, which is what they're doing. And why do we know it's heckling? Because we can hear the response. It's not just they haven't got anything substantial to say. If they have, then I can say, okay, that's a good point. Let's go with that. But nothing that those two have said is anything other than vacuous statements or heckling. Because they just don't understand it.
But you want to bet he thinks it's substantial?
Yeah, but I think that's obviously the case with those sort of things. But if you explained it more deeply, maybe they would understand it. Maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. But I think anybody that understands the Euthyphro dilemma with a little bit more nuance can recognize that what they've said is completely vacuous. That doesn't address the points at all. At least Yusuf tried to do it. It wasn't particularly structured or anything like that. But at least he tried to do it, and he's sort of trying to take the William Lane Craig or that sort of apologetic of claiming there's this third option.
Yeah.
Nor that he just acts simply on whims.
So I mean, just because 3 people call it a false dilemma doesn't make it a false.
Beautiful, lovely response, right? Just because you guys claim it is, you haven't actually. And the other thing that Mosster could say is just you haven't presented an argument. You've just claimed that there's this third option. Why should I accept this option is true, right? And maybe he'll say that. I can't remember exactly now.
You've clearly picked the first horn of the dilemma. Excuse me.
Correct.
You've clearly picked the first horn of the dilemma, where if God decrees it, then it becomes more moral, basically. It could be anything. So, for example, if today God says alcohol is not moral, which he did in the past, during the Prophet's time, the companions used to drink alcohol. And then now he said that alcohol is forbidden. And again, in the afterlife, when you go, you'll be drinking alcohol, and it will be, again, moral. So it makes morality pretty arbitrary. And then,
okay, you see why he did this now? That was a beautiful example.
Sorry,
right?
I jumped the gun. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's fine. But that's a wonderful response to show it. And I think, like I say, if he had made it clearer in the beginning and got them to agree what objective means, and that it's unchanging, it's a fact of the matter, then he presents this, it's much more devastating, because now you'll hear the responses, and the responses now, just wait for this. Okay. Just listen to this.
Yeah, but this is a bomb now.
then
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Because,
there's so many loaded premises, mate, that are just wrong.
So first of all,
what is wrong? What is wrong about?
So I'll tell you.
Show me where it says we're going to drink alcohol in the afternoon.
Okay, so again, now he's going off. Show me where it says this, right? They all know that they all claim that alcohol is banned, right? And he's going off about the heaven thing here as well. You don't even need the heaven. So again, a small tweak for you, Mosster. Don't even worry about the heaven side of it. The more information that you add that isn't necessary to your argument, the more they can tag onto the paths that aren't relevant and go down a tangent, which is exactly what Hamza is going to do. Just stick with the fact that prior they were allowed to drink alcohol in this world, and then at some point they got the command that they weren't supposed to drink it. Leave out the heaven at this stage. You don't need it. And as you'll see now, it just allows Hamza to go off on another tangent.
In the afterlife.
So are you denying that claim?
No, you made the claim, mate.
Okay, so are you denying it though?
No, you made the claim, mate. No, you
Are you
made the
challenging
claim.
the
You
claim?
said we're going to drink intoxicants in the afterlife. Where'd you get that
Yeah.
from?
The Quran specifically says that it's not going to
No,
be
one
an
second,
intoxicant.
Yusuf. No. You made the claim,
Alcohol,
Mr.
I
Mosster.
said alcohol, not intoxicants.
Well,
Okay, so this is like a breathing room, right? This is because they've been on the defensive. Now it's a case of, okay, you've made a claim here, you defend it. At this stage, one of two things could have happened. A, Mosster maybe doesn't add the claim about the heaven, or do what we said before, which is, do you know what, I withdraw that. Let's not talk about heaven. I don't need that. That's fine, whatever about heaven. Let me bring your attention back to the important part, which is the fact that Allah said, or that they were allowed to drink alcohol, and then at some point they weren't, right? That's the point. And if objective morality is a fact of the matter and unchanging, how can it be the case that at one point it was okay and then one point it wasn't? That's the way he could frame the question, and then he doesn't need this, and he can bypass all of this sort of red herring trivial points.
Yeah, but it's such fun. I also do that.
You can, but it just means that they can then, give themselves breathing room, try and take the conversation off in a different direction or whatever the case is.
No, they can't. No.
Well, I mean, they're
you just go.
gonna
Hang
try
on.
now.
Is wine prohibited in heaven? Now, what Yusuf is doing is he is saying, okay, what we need to clarify here is it says that this will not make you drunk. In other words, the effect that wine has on earth, it does not have in heaven. So what they are saying, this means that the wine in heaven is not really wine, even though it is being used as the same word. So what they are doing is they're playing word games here, semantics here, by saying, well, I'm going to be dishonest, and I'm going to say that the word wine here on earth has intoxicating effects, which it doesn't have in heaven, instead of just saying it doesn't have any effect on us. So what they're trying to do is, I think, is actually the more complicated way, which you can go and fault them on this by saying wine is given to us. There are rivers of wine in heaven. That's the description that it says in the Quran. So you can't get away from that. And now to say, well, these are not intoxicants, this is not really wine, it is not, that is bullshit. And this is why I catch them out with this. But then I don't know how good Mosster is with the contents of the Quran.
Yeah, but I think stops as well. They can. This will take you down a track that I'm not sure. If you're, it depends what your goal is. If the goal is to press the Euthyphro dilemma, then going down that route I don't think is helpful, because all a Muslim has to say is, well, okay, it is wine, but we are now spirit and we are not affected by wine as we were by a human. And to them, that's a get out of jail. Wine could in fact be exactly the same as it is here. It just doesn't have an effect because they're now a spirit, and therefore they can have, quote unquote, the good taste of alcohol without the negative effects. And that's how they can get out of it. Now you get into that conversation, and that's unhelpful if your goal is to press the Euthyphro dilemma.
No. My goal is to show the inconsistency. My goal is to show that it's allowed, then it's not allowed, and then it's allowed. So you are being prohibited something in your life, which in the afterlife is then allowed to you. The problem is that in Islam, all your life you are told you're not allowed to drink alcohol and you're not allowed to have sex. Where then the reward for not doing these two things is exactly that in heaven, where it's only sex and alcohol.
Yeah, but I think they can easily answer this by saying, well, then it's not a negative effect in heaven, because the only reason
it's just showing the
that's prohibited-
inconsistency.
Yeah, but they're not going to accept that it's inconsistent, because they're going to say that the nature of a spirit or a whatever that in heaven is not the same as man. So even though those things would be considered bad here,
Granted.
they're not bad there because of this. So I think it's just too easy for them to get out of that, unless there's some other bigger point there. But that's why I think.
Okay, but I'm taking your point on board. That it's much easier to stick with the first two instead of going up, down, up. Just don't do the up, down. It's sufficient. It's enough. You don't need more. I just like pushing in the extra one. But I'm realizing that I'm opening myself up to more. On the tangent. I don't know, stupid.
Yeah, and if you concede on this point,
Yeah.
right? If you were to concede, like you might do at the moment in time, and go, okay, well, I can accept that alcohol's got exactly the same properties in heaven that it has here, but that you're a spirit and you're unaffected by the negative properties, then alcohol is in fact not bad in heaven. If you concede that point, which I think you probably would have to if you were pressed on it, now they feel like they've got a victory. And actually, that's a trivial victory that is of no consequence, because it's not dealing with the main point.
I think
And they're so good
updates,
at sidestepping the main point here, as we're seeing at the moment. It's like we've just got to be so laser focused, right? That's the biggest thing to take, and it's not easy, and it's a process of learning. And as we, review this. We sort of hopefully remind ourselves, remind the viewers, and Mosster as well.
But alcohol is
what are you talking about?
Alcohol is an intoxicant.
Okay.
Alcohol is intoxicant.
Okay. Allow me. Did the companions of the Prophet drink alcohol?
Listen, I'm not interested in that. You made a claim. Let's deal with that first. You want
I'm
to take it back?
asking
You can take it
Okay,
back.
I'm not making any claim.
No.
Let's give it him. Yes, they did.
Let me take my claims back. Okay.
Go on.
I don't.
There we go. Good. Okay, very good. Right, because he wants to go on it. Yusuf is going to be honest there. He's going to deal with a question there and not sidestep it. Right. He said yes, they did. Right, and you'll hear. I think Hashim agreed to this in a moment as well. Right. You won't hear Hamza agree to this, even though that's of course what they did.
Because he's
This is what I was scared.
Yeah.
This is what I was worried about, is that you're going to turn the flip around and put me in a spot where I have to justify it.
Go on,
Okay, so I take my claim back. Okay. Now I'm asking a question.
Shuffle. It's
If you make a claim
Were the companions of the Prophet?
you have to correct
Yes.
it. So the companions did drink before the ayah for its forbidding, for its being haram, came down. Do you understand? So alcohol was made haram gradually, not overnight. So
it doesn't matter whether gradually or not. It changed.
If you let me finish, maybe you'll get an answer. Okay,
but he just gave the answer. Now all you're going to do is monologue. You gave the answer that it happened gradually. At one point they were a quote allowed, and then his words, right, not mine. It became haram. What does that mean? Right? If you just break that down, all that means is that at one point it was allowed, and then at one point it was disallowed. And now the question, which is obviously where he's driving to, is how can it be the case if it's objective, and which again we would need to clarify in the very beginning, that it's a fact of the matter and it's unchanging. If you grant that it does change, then it's not a fact of the matter that remains unchanging, in which case it's entirely arbitrary. Whatever God decides, his whims or his desires, is what you're calling your morality. And then what you mean by objective is whatever God's desires are. And I'm not going to accept that as objective. Now you're just saying to me it's subjective because of a divine, being. That makes it no better than our subjective morality.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that, if you are aware of any habit of a person, for example, a drug addict or an alcohol addict, you will know that the people who treat them, they do not send them into a cold turkey situation where they stop it overnight. That is more harmful for them, even scientifically. So this is the wisdom of Allah, where in a community where alcohol was permissible, yes, before the command of his forbidding the alcohol came down. So Allah did not just say overnight, okay, from tonight, no more alcohol, that's it. That would be detrimental to the community.
Whoa, did you hear this? That would be detrimental to the
That's
community.
That's a claim. Show your claim.
but you know how this is worse than he can imagine. The fact that, because remember, everything's a test. But he's claiming that it would be detrimental to the community if Allah stopped it immediately. So the community's well-being or the moral good of the community is such that Allah is subject to the community. That's that's the inference. Now he will deny it till the cows come out. But why else would you do it slowly? Because it's not good, apparently, for the community. But hang on a moment, everything's a test. If you trust in Allah and he's the ultimate arbiter of morality, and if you're claiming that he did it slowly, well, then you could claim the same about anything else. You can claim, and they do about slavery. Well, it happened slowly because it would have had such a negative effect on the community. Hang on a moment. This is all a test. And if the test is that you have to have some hardships and trust and have faith in Allah, then so be it. This is not about making life easier for you, because whenever it suits you, you guys will say it's a test. So he shooting himself in both feet, in the neck, in both hands. I mean, this is just absolutely devastating to their position. He just doesn't even realize how bad what he's just said is. Now, I would have said, don't worry about this, right? This is just, but he's like shot himself, with a shotgun in the stomach here. Really, this is diabolical. I'm not sure that he realizes what he's actually said here. That's how bad that's what happens sometimes, right? It's rare that they shoot themselves in the foot after making a bad statement. Normally you want to just focus on the statement, but he's made it so much worse by making these claims. Holy crap, I don't think he realizes.
Good catch, yeah.
It'll be harmful to the community. So initially Allah forbids it, basically kind of makes it in a way that there is some good in it, but the harm outweighs the benefit. Okay? And then gradually it was made completely forbidden. So what you need to understand is that once this ayah came down, once the command of Allah came to the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, they immediately stopped that. Once it was completely forbidden, many of them actually had a sip of alcohol. Yes, when they heard this command, they spat that out. So this is to the...
But they drank, but the community drank slowly, and it was slowly forbidden, and then suddenly it was forbidden, then they all spat it out. I mean, just like contradict yourself.
The other thing, just in case somebody is watching who doesn't know this, there is no command in the Quran. It's not forbidden. It just says avoid what the devil does, and this is the whole point. It doesn't say it is forbidden to drink alcohol. A lot of Muslims think it says that because they don't read the Quran. They're just picking up what other people tell them what it says, and this is not what it says. So what Hashim is doing, he's telling people about something in the Quran that does not exist. So just in case somebody's wondering.
Yeah, that's a good argument you could bring against them. A bit different to this, and that would again take you off on a tangent. But that is a good argument you can make separately about the whole alcohol thing as well. This guy, this statement would be valid. The guy at the bottom there, speaking without knowledge, evidence, thumbs down. Right? You would think that if you were watching this from somebody who's unbiased, he'd be speaking about Hashim at this moment in time. Yeah. But likely he's not, right? And the irony of this comment at the bottom, it just happened to pop up there that I saw while you were speaking, isn't lost on me. That comment fits perfectly with what Hashim is saying. But of course, in this guy's mind, it presumably applies to Mosster, which is just ironic in the extreme.
The extent that they actually went to once it was forbidden. So they had it stored in huge jars, the wine, in the wine cellars. They broke that once it was forbidden. So there was like lots of alcohol everywhere you could see on the ground, so this is the command that they followed. Now what you need to understand is that in paradise, yes, there will be wine, but that wine is not something that will harm you, that will not intoxicate.
But there you go, right? So now he's going off on that tangent. That's why it's not good to bring this up, right? He's already made a devastating concession about this whole thing of being slow and it's not good for you, which contradicts the idea of it being a test. But the bigger point, even if you ignore all of that devastating self-shooting in the foot, is the bigger point that at one point it was okay, and at some other point, whether it's slow, fast, or instantaneous, then it became not okay, right? That's the point that he's focusing on, and that's the only point that he needs to make here, that they are now having a great difficulty or that they have to explain. And this is not an explanation. All he's agreeing is that, hey, what you're saying actually happened. The question is, why did that happen? Was it not the case that it was always bad for them? And if it was always the case, why didn't he do it right in the beginning? And if you're claiming what you did was shoot yourself in the foot, that it had to happen slowly, well, then now God is subject to their, them being, not being put into an uncomfortable position. But then again, everything's a test, so they should be put in an uncomfortable position, especially if they're doing something that's immoral. So that statement is self-defeating.
So I laughed because he was contradicting Hamza. Because Hamza said, no, there is no such thing. And now he's saying, well, yes, there is. So they don't even know what they're talking amongst themselves. No consistency.
Yeah, I think they've got different ideas themselves, right? But they're not going to go out and, like you and I might go, Rob, I'm not sure if that stops. These guys won't do that, right? If they've got a different idea, they'll just keep quiet. Maybe they'll talk about it separately, right? Their whole thing is don't disagree in public. And even if somebody says something else, if they're all a team like they are here, they're not going to contradict or say, although Yusuf will occasionally pipe up and say, well, I've got a slightly different view here. But I mean, somebody else said to me, I wonder how long that will continue for. And again, that'll be interesting, right? We're seeing him at the early stages. Let's see what happens 2-3 years down the line, whether he's still prepared to speak out and have a different view to them. Because we're seeing it already, right? He's being pushed into this paradigm of, hey, if it doesn't say these words or if it doesn't say X or Y in my theology, then I'm going to ignore it, or it doesn't work, or it's incompatible, or whatever the case is. And of course, that's not the case.
Intoxicate you. Yes, like it does now. For example, if I were to ask you the question, since we are talking about morality and immorality, what is it that will, I don't know, convince you that alcohol is something that is harmful to you, to your body?
Before that, I want to address all the things that you mentioned.
In order for you I can't. It's harmful to you and to the society as a whole.
For us, it's God. Your point unaddressed that you mentioned before. You actually made my case for me. So, for example, you said that God commanded that alcohol should be forbidden, and that is what my point is. That
just
it cannot be
objective. Just a second, yeah, go on. I understand your principle. What you're trying to say is, irregardless of
So,
if the companion juice. No, one second. So, regardless of whether the companion's drunk and then stopped drinking, your point is this: God changed the law, yeah?
Yes.
Right. And do you think that if God changes the law, it ceases to be objective? Is that what you're saying?
Well, then it becomes subjective.
No, it doesn't.
Reasoning.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Okay, so maybe the correct way to respond to that is, what do you guys think? What do you guys think? If God changes his mind, because I don't know if I heard him correctly, he said that it becomes objective. Did I hear that correctly? What did Mosster say? Subjective, okay. I think the other thing is, well, what do you guys believe? Do you think that God can change his mind on a whim or a desire, and that is still objective? That's why, again, I keep saying it like a broken record, you've got to be so clear in the beginning on the definitions, because this is what happens down the line. They start to shift around here, and if you can hold them and say, hang on a moment, but you said it was a fact of the matter and it's unchanging. That's what it means to be a fact, and that's what objective refers to. If you had said it clearly in the beginning, then all of this you could bulldoze over this instantly. But now they're going to dance around. Hamza is going to make the absolutely ridiculous claim that, hey, if God changes his mind, then it's still objective. Right? Well, what do you mean by objective? Anything that God does, there's not a fact of the matter. He could change his mind tomorrow. That's what the implication. If that's the route you want to go, then we can't take anything as being objectively the case for all time, because at any point he can change his mind. He doesn't realize the implications of what he's saying here, but he wants to hold to the view that no, if God can change his mind, it's still objective.
The thing is that you need to spell it out here. You need to tell the people, well, which part is objective? Is it objectively moral to drink alcohol the way it was for 300,000 years? Or is it objective morality if you don't drink alcohol? Which is the objective part? So you need to spell it out for them.
Well, what he's trying to do here is have his cake and eat it and say, no, it's objective, whether it was prior or it isn't now. And that's just untenable.
Yeah.
That's your problem.
Okay. So
living in the wilderness. They were living in the desert. So
can I give an example, guys?
Allow me, please. Before I forget.
No, Hashim, forget the specifics. It's the principle he's trying to establish. He thinks because God changed his mind on that principle, because Allah said 1 minute they could drink and now they can't. He thinks because that law changed, that's somehow now become a subjective thing rather. It's still objective.
He'd have a point if God said you could drink, but he never made. God never made a command saying you can drink. So this is the thing. So God is having the command is still present. They're just ignorant of it.
So he's trying to go with a view. It's okay. So he's trying to get out of this by saying, no, it was always wrong, but God never told them about this. Okay, well, whose fault is that then? Right? And if you're going to go with that line of thinking, then it suddenly becomes, so it was always, that's the claim that he's making. But now who's at fault here? If God allowed them to do this, then is God immoral for allowing this? Because he could have told them at any time. And in fact, you could argue that in some of the other books it mentioned alcohol. I don't know, Stops. I'm not that familiar with Judaism or Christianity, but whether it said anything about alcohol under certain circumstances. But that's not a good response either, because if it took God, as you said, 100,000 years or whatever to get to that point, but all the time it was wrong, then he must have allowed that. And if he didn't allow it, why didn't he make it clear? So either he permitted it, or if he didn't permit it, he didn't make it clear. But either way, this is a problem for God and not for humans. So this doesn't get you out of this by claiming that, no, it was always wrong, but he only made it explicitly clear at this particular moment. That still doesn't help you get out of this. It's slightly better than Hamza's view of trying to have your cake and eat it, but this doesn't help you either.
And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals it at a particular time, and he has mercy on them because of their ignorance of the command. He hadn't revealed it to them. What you're saying only makes sense if there was an explicit command that said alcohol is halal, but there never was. There was never any of that sort. So it was not a gradual revealing.
Rob, just saying of some. This is a principle that people need to understand about Islam. The principle is, if it is not prohibited, if it's not forbidden, it is allowed. This is the whole principle of Sharia. So you need to understand Islam, and I think Yusuf is not that clued up about Islam.
Yeah.
But this is something that you need to be aware of. I'm just pointing that out for people who don't know this.
Yeah, a very, very good point, right? That's a theological point that he's unaware of, that he's actually arguing against a well-established theological or Islamic point. If something isn't disallowed, then it is allowed. And so this claim is contrary to that as well. So that's an extra nail in the coffin. So it's actually getting worse for him. And that's because of probably his ignorance of that theological point.
Something that was the case, and him not revealing that straight away does not suggest a change in his law. All it suggests is a gradual revealing of it, which is a completely distinct thing.
So that's a good point, Yusuf, and that's why I was really looking forward to talking to you specifically in this stream, and that is a good point. So from that follows is, would you say that there are verses in the Quran, and I don't want to make a claim, I want to ask you, that where God allowed praying while being intoxicated?
Allowed praying.
Super.
Yeah.
So
It's the same principle.
yeah, can I just make a point? So we know that, for example, other societies in the past, recent past, have also concluded that alcohol is something that should be banned. And I'm talking about America.
Okay, but that's irrelevant. Whether somebody else found out that it was banned, his question was very clear. Can you see how they're not answering it? Yeah. Was there a time when they were commanded or whatever under Islam to pray and they were intoxicated? Right, because presumably if he's praying to Allah, then you would expect him to tell you that if this thing was supposedly always wrong, to tell you before you start praying. At the moment that Islam comes into being, you want all of these important things to be said, the most immoral things to be outlined immediately and not over time. That argument is just dead in the water, right? The one that, hey, he did it slowly because otherwise it would have been a hardship. Well, that's your claim. Whenever there's a hardship, you claim it's a test, and here's a test. So that argument is dead. But this particular one doesn't help you at all, and certainly not appealing to other views anyway, because you guys think that Islam is true. So whatever other guys came to the conclusion about rightly or wrongly is irrelevant to the point about Islam doing so.
And Ultra, I'll say it instead of Rob, because Rob, I'm sure if he would see, he will say, go G block.
Oh, yeah, hey, Ultra Funky. Oh, good, man. Right.
These where they tried the prohibition, and what they did was they banned the law came out, no more alcohol, and we know all about what happened during the prohibition. People were making their own, they were bootleg, moonlighting, making their own wine, making their own alcohol. There were underground parties. They were unable to control this at all, and then what they ended up was having loads of people in prison, and then they ended up actually just abandoning the law because it didn't work. Now what you have in the Quranic example is the wisdom of bringing a people who are temporal, are human beings, to a level of morality that the God requires, understanding the psychology and the physiology of the human being. So we see.
Okay, so if he does understand the psychology and so forth, he could have made this abundantly clear hundreds of thousands of years ago. And the implication that that is being made here, that you will try and deny till the house comes home, is that God is subject to his creation because they are this imperfect being, and it has to happen slowly, otherwise it's going to affect them negatively. No, that's not your position anyway. So you're back to the whole sort of thing about God has got to be subject to them. Now they will deny this. That's the implication he's making. Otherwise he could have done it immediately, straight away, 100,000 years ago, and made it clear around the world that this is bad.
And on top of which he creates human beings which generate alcohol within their metabolism. So what's on with that?
Yeah, well, they'd claim that. Yeah, that's a good point. If there was supposed to be no alcohol, then you wouldn't expect the body to generate some small level of whatever level it is of alcohol. But I suppose they could just answer by saying something like, well, that has no effect, or it has it's part of the natural processes, but it's not effective. When you inhale external alcohol, that's when it's bad, blah blah. Again, and then you'd have to ask, well, okay, what's the evidence for that? Now they have to appeal to external evidence. Once they appeal to external evidence, now they are using something that's outside of God, i.e. now they're taking the second horn of the dilemma to go, okay, now I know why it's wrong because I'm looking outside and I'm seeing the effect. But hang on a moment. Originally you said it was bad because God said so. Now to firm up your belief, you are now you're jumping to the second horn and you're looking at something outside of God. Now you're being inconsistent with your claim. You
Exactly.
cannot appeal to something outside of your God to justify why you think something's wrong. Otherwise, you're taking the second horn of the dilemma. So that's another thing to be aware of. If the moment they claim anything, some sort of evidence, appearance about the world outside them, now they've taken the second horn. No, can't do that.
We see how humans have tried it in the 1920s, ban it, nothing, it wasn't good, it didn't work for the society. Actually, the way to do it is to do this withdrawal method, so that you're not only physiologically withdrawn from the alcohol, but psychologically, because it's associated with your social structure, with your interactions and these things, you're also psychologically withdrawn from the alcohol. And this is why, by and large, it was a complete success. There were some people who weren't able to actually give up their alcohol. We're aware of.
Okay, it wasn't a complete success by your own stance, because some people won't be able to give it up. Try not to contradict yourself in the very next sentence. I mean, holy crap, at least give it a few sentences before you contradict yourself. But this is, again, just saying that Allah is what's the word I'm looking for? Subservient almost to the whims of his creation, because his creation takes so long to get over alcohol. Therefore, Allah's got to take this slow time, because otherwise it wouldn't be good for them. But who cares whether it's good? Allah knows that it's not good for them. Just ban it immediately. The side effects, the withdrawal symptoms, that's just a test. They have to get over it. They were doing these bad things. This will give them a clear test and a clear reason not to take alcohol again. No, but they want to have their cake and eat it.
Am I expecting too much of a God if I say, why doesn't a God who knows these things never even produce alcohol, never even give human beings the ability to produce alcohol or make them impervious to the effects of alcohol? It's the same thing with slavery. Why does he first allow slavery and then says,
they've got
and
an
free
easy,
them?
yeah, they've got an easy answer, or what they think is an easy answer, right? Because he's got to allow all of this bad so that you know what good is, and so that you can have free will. Now, of course, that immediately just gets that response just gets immediately refuted by asking them about heaven. Is there any evil in heaven? Do you still have free will? You have free will in heaven. There is no evil. Therefore, this claim is completely refuted. So it isn't necessary to have these things if you claim that there's another place where you can have free will and you don't need to have any evil. So that argument wouldn't work, but that's what they would try. That would be their immediate response. So always use the heaven as an example. Ask them about heaven. Get them to agree that there's free will and no evil in heaven, and then say, hang on a moment. So you do accept that there is a place where this can be the case. Now they have to come up with some other reason why evil is needed here, because they can't just say because you wouldn't have free will, because obviously in heaven you do have free will and there is no evil. So again, that would be their immediate off-the-cuff response, but that response just refutes that on the spot.
Aware of this as well, but that was the approach. This is progressive revelation with a destination in mind. Now, what you can't do, and which is what you seem to be doing, is to look at a previous iteration of the where the goal was trying to be and say that was somehow also part of the goal. Now, the alcohol was already flowing and already being drunk, and it was how the most humane way, i.e. the most merciful way, to get these people as a society to a state where they were non-drinkers of alcohol. And so I don't see what point you're trying to make, that even if there was a time when there were people who could pray and they were intoxicated, this is not a criteria that God is requiring. God is taking these people progressively to a state where they can stop drinking completely.
Okay, but I think he summed the whole thing up himself. He doesn't see what the argument is, and it's clear by these responses he's just not tracking the problem here. Right? He thinks that whatever happens, but he's got this view and he's openly said that this is the best possible world. So he has now got to rationalize that whatever happens, this is the best possible way for it to be. And the question to ask somebody like Imran is, what would it take for you to accept that this was not created by God? What would the state of affairs need to be such that you would say, no, this is not what God's will is? Ask him that question, right? If he stops to really think about that, that is a very, very hard question, if not a downright devastating question for him to try and elucidate. Because he seems to have an unfalsifiable position, which is, whatever I look around, this is the best possible world. So everything has to be explained in some way by this is the best way it could have been. I.e., God's the most moral and he's the paragon of morality. Well, what would be a world, if the world was entirely evil, you would still say the same thing. If the world was totally good, you'd say the same thing. So what would the world need to look like such that this was not the case? And you probably find that his answer would be, there is no such thing. That would not be possible, or some words that.
If he's consistent, yeah.
Yeah, and at that stage, then there's no point in having a further conversation. He's now disqualified himself from having any rational position. Anybody can claim a dogmatic, unfalsifiable position, and there's no way to have a rational discussion around this. The only reason to continue is to expose this line of thinking that he's engaged in at the moment to other people, and explain why this is so devastating, and why you as a listener or a viewer should not be following along Imran's footsteps here.
Okay. So, Brother Hashim, I can't see your names, by the way. So, Dr. Imran, I know.
Yeah,
I think like both your points are relating to the practicality of implementing the ban of the alcohol. That is not my point, right? I want to bring it back to the principle. Is that the principle is? Would you say then, based on what Yusuf said, would you say that the companions of the Prophet were immoral when they were praying while drinking, or when they were consuming alcohol? Because like Yusuf said, Yusuf said that it was always immoral. Correct me if I'm wrong, Yusuf, if I'm misrepresenting.
Beautiful, right? This is wonderful. So he's brought it back to the principle. That was his entire point. So again, spot on here, Mosster, for bringing it back. We can address the practicalities and show how that's absurd based on their other claims about, the world in general and the practical implementation of X, Y, and Z. But he's now pointing out that Yusuf said one thing, these guys are saying another. Who's right? How do you reconcile this? Right, a great way to bring it back. So really, really,
this is excellent. The way he's doing it, the way that he's addressing one person in particular, so that the others don't even have a chance to jump in. Very, very good tactic.
Yeah, focus on the person, say their name, and try and address them. Because then, if other people jumps in, it looks like they're being rude, over talking, whatever the case is, or they're trying to protect the other guy. Right, and so a great way to do it, something that we can all learn from here. Address with the person's name. Hey, Yusuf, you said X, Y, and Z, and then he knows who he's speaking, and then that particular person now should have an obligation to respond to them.
Representing you. Just because you said earlier that just because God did not make it halal, that doesn't mean it wasn't haram. Correct? You just said that.
So if I could throw you, I know you're going to jump in on this. But let me just make another point to you, because I think it might help.
Okay, can you see
another tangent?
Can you see the tactics? Yeah, this is the group tactics that goes on here. This is a safe space for them, because they can dance around this a little bit at speaker's corner by other people jumping in or whatever the case is. But did you notice there was again this uncomfortable silence? It only lasts for a second or two, but it's very noticeable to Stops and I, because these guys constantly interrupt, right? So there was a silence there. Yusuf was like, oh shit, what do I say now, right? And so Imran comes in here to rescue him. So this is a rescue tactic now, and this is typical when they're in a group like this, when somebody else is sort of, stopped for a moment to think about it. If I was having a conversation, if it was me and Yusuf, I keep quiet now, right? I let Yusuf think about this. I let it sink into the brain and let the brain start thinking. The moment I say a word, right, it just interrupts his thinking process. But because there's a group of them, they can do this, and they do this, and we're seeing it happen here. Why are they doing this? So that it doesn't look like he doesn't know what to say now. But that's exactly what I want. It's not that I don't want him to say something. I want him to think. And he's now getting a chance to get out of having to think on the spot. And that's important, because what it does, it's not just that it's thinking on the spot, but there's a psychology that's going on. You're being put a little bit on the spot, and it's something that you will remember. You'll go to sleep going, what should I say there? Or something like that, right? It's more than just a passing comment that you forget about in the moment. And that's the other power of this. Have the silence there, but they, as you can see, they won't allow this. That's why one-on-one is much better. Or it's got to be moderated, where they're all muted and you're speaking to one person until he's done, or he asks for help, or whatever the case may be.
And one thing, I understand Yusuf, because he knows exactly. He's thinking, if I now agree, because it sounds intuitively correct, but if I agree, what am I agreeing to, and is it going to come back later to bite me? So I can fully understand him.
Yeah,
Might help you.
Well, that was a question for Yusuf.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but you're jumping on some.
There we go. So he was great again. He said that question's for Yusuf, right? But now, of course, because Darren's in charge here, he's got to say something. He's got to jump on this, right? You can see how they close ranks around Yusuf, because he wasn't sure what to say here, which is fine. And I'm okay if Yusuf said to me, Rob, do you know what? That's a good question. I have to think about it. No problem. Do you want to have a few moments to think? Now do you want to come back to me, right?
Exactly.
I don't want to make a fool of Yusuf or anybody else. I want them to think. But they're closing ranks to try and, save their man in a sense, because they can see that there's a bit of silence. He's not sure what to say here, so let's close ranks and just fill up the airwaves with speech.
Do you want to predict what Hamza is going to say? It's going to be
Yeah.
something completely ridiculous, something completely off
I
track.
can't remember.
Okay, but this is my prediction.
Yeah.
Well, I was never jumping. I never talked
You
about the
are.
practicality of.
Okay, don't worry. There's
No,
no.
I never-
We've already
I-
established. We
It's
It's
already,
all right. It's all right.
It's a
look, we
straightforward
already
thing.
It's all right.
established. We already established morality is based upon what God says is right and what is wrong. Yeah, halas. So whilst it wasn't prohibited, it wasn't wrong.
So while it wasn't wrong, he's directly contradicting Yusuf now. This is the other side, right? You're absolutely right, Stops. And I think, in fact, Yusuf is wrong in this case, but he is contradicting Yusuf here now because he hasn't been following along necessarily as well, or he's just right happy to do this. Now, I don't know that he realizes in the moment that he's directly contradicting Yusuf. But actually, he's right on the theology side, and Yusuf isn't. But there's a contradiction between the two of them here.
Right.
And if Mosster, and maybe he's going to be very polite here, but I would immediately say, but hang on a moment. Now,
What are you doing
You guys
now?
can't decide amongst yourself. Yusuf said that it was
Exactly.
always wrong. You're saying no, it wasn't always wrong. That's what I've heard as well. Yusuf, do you want to agree with Hamza now?
Hamza,
Okay,
yeah.
great. Let's go with that, right? Whichever way you go, there's a problem. But do you guys want to get clarity there amongst yourselves first? Because it looks like there's disagreement, right? That's another way you could highlight what's going on. But he's now directly contradicting his buddy here.
Also,
Okay, so
whether
it's
or not
arbitrary.
they did
Then morality is
something.
arbitrary under Islam.
No.
Okay, but Mosster, let them contradict each other here. Let them try and get out of this, right? Don't say anything at this point. Once this happens, let it hang in the air there. The moment you start to speak, it gives them it closes the moment. The moment needs to hang there for a moment so that everybody can hear it. Now, it might bypass many people who are not paying attention, but leave it in the air. Don't speak at this moment in time because now it's Darren and it's Yusuf that have to somehow reconcile what they're saying. One of them has to change their position. It's unlikely to be Darren. So Yusuf is now going to try and say something, presumably. I don't remember to see that he can conform with Darren. So let's see.
No, it's not. So whether or
Okay.
not they were, whether what they were doing was immoral is also dependent upon their being ignorant of the law. If you're ignorant
Okay.
of the law, then like you're not equivalent to one who is aware of the law and aware of the law and actively seeks to break it.
What?
But that's not the point, right? The point is, was it objectively wrong? Not whether somebody themselves was ignorant about the law. Is it always wrong for that to be the case? That's the question. You said it was always wrong, even if they didn't know about it. Now you're changing the position to, well, it's not a problem for them because they were ignorant. We're not talking about them specifically.
Exactly.
They happen to be the consequence of this not being clear over time. But the question is has it always been immoral to drink alcohol, or has it not? You originally said that it was always immoral. Hamza said no, it wasn't always immoral. One of you guys needs to reconcile this, because it's a direct contradiction. You can't be both moral and immoral, right? So there is a contradiction between the two of you. But now you're sidestepping it to focus on them. We're not talking about them. We're
It's
talking
off
about the
track,
command of God, because God is the objective standard. That's what Mosster is talking about, not the people.
Okay.
So there's that
We
distinction.
do not punish a people until we send to them a messenger. Basic principle, very fundamental principle.
So if I don't know whether murder is legal or not in some particular country and I kill someone, it's my ignorance that I didn't know that law. But does it make it moral?
That's a great rebuttal, right? That is actually a very good rebuttal, because now he's taking their principle, right? The principle is if you don't know something, you're ignorant. Are you being immoral? Let's just hear what they say, right? That's called a reductio ad absurdum. So take a different position, and then show how their position is absurd, reduced to absurdity, reductio ad absurdum, reduced to absurdity. So you take a counter position, you use the principle that they've invoked, and then you say, okay, well, is this principle an actual consistent principle you're using?
I never said it made it moral.
Okay,
I said
so I'm not immoral then, if I kill someone without knowing the law.
So
I think just look at the faces there. I mean, the other thing to do is just look at what's going on here. I think he's actually doing really well, especially in the heat of the moment with five guys around, right? There's tweaks that we've said that can happen, but I think overall this is quite a good discussion he's having here. Just look at the faces there. It's like, shit, what do we do now, right? Now they're being pressed with actually a reductio, and a reductio is great for getting the brain thinking. And you can see the cogs are working here, or at least attempting to. Right, there was that silence for a moment. Now they're trying to sort of bumble over a response here. And I think it's good from a thinking point of view. It's not to make fools of them. I think they've got a weak position, and you could take the view that they're foolish. That's not my view. I want these guys to think, and what I think Mosster is doing really well here is using these specific questions and so forth and the reductio to get them to think, right? And that silence is just brilliant. How do they reconcile this? Right?
You would be very good in street epistemology, much better than I am, because he doesn't get carried away and doesn't get involved.
Yes, he's very calm about this. Right?
Yeah. So I'll take a quick break.
Okay, cool.
With certain things, right, it's an interesting point because with regards to
there's a point to ignorance. You cannot just say if I murder someone and I didn't know the law of the country, then I'll be going scot-free. Look,
well, that's what Euthyphro is saying.
No, it's not.
It's quite interesting that what you've done is you've taken a benign, and I would say drinking alcohol is a benign example. We know
what drinking alcohol is a benign example. It's something that's immoral, that has, according to you guys, massive negative effects. It does all kinds of terrible things. People beat each other, do all kinds of things that you observe in the world anyway, and now you're claiming it's benign? He's just taking another example and using Yusuf's principle to show that this is absurd, to say that, hey, if you didn't know that it was immoral, then you aren't immoral for doing it. And he just asked the same question, right? And because you guys have realized that this, or potentially realized, and maybe some of you haven't, this reductio is showing that particular response is absurd, you're now trying to, and just listen to what he says here now. This is something that I think is a little bit, if I have to say so, irritating about Imran, right? Just listen to how he mischaracterizes this now.
We know there were companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who went to paradise who were alcoholics, yeah? You've taken a benign example.
Hang on a moment. How do you know that anybody went to paradise? You don't know that as a Muslim, so stop making claims that you're ignorant about. That comment at the bottom here about making claims that you're ignorant of, yeah, good luck with that.
And to contrast the idea, you've then gone to a very extreme example to try and contrast.
Yeah, there's a false.
No, well, he can go with an extreme example. He's showing you that the principle that Yusuf is presenting is an absurd principle, and he can bring in an extreme example. That's exactly what a reductio does, is bring an extreme example to see whether your principle holds up. If you're going to hold to your principle, then it needs to hold under all conditions. And if it's not going to hold under all conditions, then you have to show why it's not special pleading. So it's a very good tactic. The fact that it makes you uncomfortable or you don't have a good response, claiming that it's extreme, is not in any way a substantial response. This is a vacuous response and completely irrelevant.
Now, what's happening? What this is? This is actually it's a logical fallacy. You're using extremes to try and make a point that doesn't actually match. There's a missing.
No, there's no logical. The only logical fallacy is you not recognizing that this is in fact a valid reductio ad absurdum. The fact that you don't even know what fallacy it is and throw out the word fallacy because you're uncomfortable or you're disagreeable with the implications of this doesn't in any way make it a fallacy. This is where I think Imran is absolutely at his weakest. Not that I think he has particularly strong points, but here in these sort of things, this is where he is absolutely terrible, right?
And it shows the last couple of seconds show that how weak they really are.
Well, him in particular at this point, right? Because he's now stepped in. I think Yusuf tried to put forward a principle that if I was speaking to him, I would just quietly show him that maybe that's not a good principle and offer him a chance to say something else. Because I really want them to bring forward something stronger than that. And not to make him foolish, but, for me it'd be, okay, Yusuf, let's rethink that. Here's the implications of that and so on, right? Do you want to, rethink that? I'm totally fine with that. This is a case of us learning together to see, what's going on or whatever the case is. Somewhere that you can soften it, right?
I'm slowly coming around to your way of thinking that, with Yusuf, you can actually still talk. I don't know for how long still, but at the moment you still can talk. I was a bit skeptical about this, but I think you can. That he is more, let's say, realistic in having a conversation with somebody instead of immediately blocking it as a knee-jerk reaction, anything that comes their way like the others are.
Yeah. But I think at this stage, if I was listening to Imran now, I'm just going to go, this is completely vacuous here. Unless he says something absolutely even more absurd than what he's already said here. This is an extreme example. That's not an objection to a reductio to say it's an extreme example. He just doesn't understand this level of argumentation. And like I said, this is where he's at his worst. And so it's either a case of, do you go down that low-hanging fruit line of thinking, or do you go back to Yusuf there and say, give him an opportunity to notice what's going on and,
But Rob, have you ever heard anything substantial or anything, I don't know, anything from Imran? Have you ever heard anything where you say, wow, that's a good point? Like with the others, well, Hashim, no, the others also not, but Imran has a degree, he has a sort of academic training, so you automatically expect it. But have you ever heard anything from him where you say, oh, that's profound, that's actually quite interesting?
No, I haven't. And I think, again, not that you're doing it, but I don't think we can confuse the fact that he's a medical doctor with the fact that he's a clear thinker on other topics. You know, somebody can follow along, and a family member of mine went down that route, and it's very much like parrot fashion, right? I'm not saying that he's that, but she was studying for, to be a doctor, and it's like you've got to follow this strict set of, it's ABCD, so you've got to learn it parrot fashion, right? That's kind of very much so somebody presents you with a case, and you diagnose it, and you follow X, Y, and Z steps, right? So it's very much that line of thinking, but that doesn't lend itself to more conceptual or to more critical thinking or philosophical thinking, right? So, but you're right. I think there is a tendency. Yeah, I think there's a tendency to go, okay, well, somebody's qualified in something that we think is quite a useful or difficult area, then we would expect, better thinking in other areas. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Even professors, get it very badly wrong in other areas that they're not experts in. Even Dawkins, we'd have to say, is not philosophically trained, and he makes a few howlers in terms of philosophy. So it happens to way better people than Imran. So I think we've got to take it on a case by case and just listen to the person. But I think, I've not heard much substantial from Imran, but here this is really terrible.
Missing middle here. Most places that you would go to in the world, most places that you would go to in the world wouldn't ever say that actually murder is fine. No, I'd say no.
That wasn't his point, right? Again, he's just entirely missing the point. He never said, hey, if you go most places, they're going to say that it's immoral, that it's not moral. That's not the point. The point was to show that, hey, if you're going to claim something is not immoral because you don't know about it, i.e. ignorance, doesn't mean that you are doing something immoral, or doesn't lead necessarily to being immoral, then that's the principle, right? You saying that other countries, other people kind of know this a priori or have some internal feeling about it is irrelevant. It just shows that he's not tracking or following this line of argumentation. The reductio is completely lost on him here, right?
Nowhere. There may be somewhere that I'm not aware of, but I would say so. You can't use that as an example to contrast a drinking alcohol, which is, most societies in the world consider it to be okay. So that's not it's
irrelevant what most societies think. You guys think it's incredibly immoral. That's all we need. That was what Yusuf's point. This is immoral, etc. Right? The fact that other societies think it's okay or not okay, completely and utterly irrelevant. And Imran does this a lot. He brings up completely irrelevant points because he's not able to or isn't tracking the conversation.
That's not really a fair comparison. Even do justice to the discussion.
It's actually a sin. It's a crime. So there's a difference. For example, there are certain countries where alcohol is forbidden. If you drink it, it's a crime. Certain countries which allow it. But look at it from your perspective, in your worldview. Yes.
Completely irrelevant. There we go again, right?
It's a hypothetical situation. He was just trying to get a model.
Because Hashim in Speaker's Corner is so used to challenging the Christians, he doesn't get his worldview challenged that often. And if you see him being challenged by Bob in these discussions, it doesn't go particularly well, right? So his methodology, as they are, and I've picked this up with other people, is tag a question on the end, or then ask somebody else a question so that you can get out of having to respond to these difficult questions when the rubber hits the road, when it becomes a bit more nuanced and there's a bit of pressure applied to your views. And because they're so used to giving superficial answers at best, and then not being challenged more deeply, when they come across somebody like Mosster or anybody else for that matter that's going to challenge them more deeply, they are unable to deal with this. And so this is one of the tactics they use to avoid, saying, hey, I don't know, or to be shown that the view that they've just presented is absurd or insubstantial or whatever the case is. So swing it around on the other guy so he has to answer.
And the other question I have, what happens if this Allah suddenly decides to change his mind? What if he suddenly decides, well, actually, alcohol is not so bad. I'm in future going to give human beings, a better liver, which can break down alcohol much faster. So alcohol is not so bad in the future. What happens if he changes his mind? Or is he not allowed to change his mind?
Well, they'll claim that's a hypothetical and that's impossible because Muhammad was the last messenger, so he wouldn't change his mind, so everything's now set in stone. Or that if you pressed them and they were intellectually honest, because they would have to answer that hypothetical if they were thinking nuancedly, they might try and dodge it, like I've said there, or some other method.
Of course.
But Hamza's view is that if he changes his mind, that's still objective and that's still moral. If you remember, Hamza said that right earlier on.
Yeah, but my question is, can this God change his mind, or is he dependent on Muhammad?
No, well, obviously they're going to say he can change his mind, but then the question is, when he changes his mind, is it still moral? According to Hamza, it is.
No, that's fine. That's I understand, of course. But then this exactly shows that if a God can change his or her or its mind or something, then that means it's not objective, it's not absolute, it's not anything. It's just the flavor of the month.
Right? Yeah, it's subject to his desires, which seem to be arbitrary desires. There's no way that you can ground those desires in something else. And if you claim it's his,
but it also shows that this God cannot change the mind. It's impossible to change the mind because it would mean having to change the Quran, which you can't do. So it would mean updating the Quran if a God changes his mind. So that means God is not all powerful because he can't change his mind.
Yeah, that's another route you could go down. Yeah.
You find something like gambling or alcohol or stealing or even murder, if you consider all these things as wrong and immoral and something which as a civilized person should not do, then would you stop it, or would you then use the words that you used earlier? Would you use your whims and fancies that just because I feel good, I'm going to drink alcohol regardless of what it does to my body?
No, that's not my point. I'm sorry. So again, I want to bring it back. Maybe this time I want to.
How would you, in your point of view, in your worldview, approach something as wrong or right?
It's not about my worldview. I'm trying to ask you a question about your worldview.
That's very good, right? He keeps doing that. That's exactly right. Don't go down the line with Hashim. That's completely irrelevant. And he's pursuing a line of questioning. That's what these guys are here for, is to answer questions about Islam or whatever the case may be. He didn't come in here to do that. And this is a complete, shifting of the burden here back onto this guy. But it's irrelevant to the original point. So he's doing well. And let's hope he stays consistent. And doesn't answer
but hang on. Look what Hamza is doing. He's looking for a reason to kick him.
Yes, yeah. And that's why, of course, this is heavily biased against anybody that comes in. And we've seen that multiple times. These guys would fare even worse if they were on a level playing field where they couldn't do this, right? And they were pressed.
This is why they don't allow us there, and they don't come to the Gin and Tonic show, because there they can't do that. That's why they're so shit scared, because they're going to be against the ropes all the time, and they can't handle that.
Yeah, and if you saw the time when Ask Yourself came in, right? He's like, he puts me to shame, right? He's like a bulldog that just goes crazy with this sort of stuff, right? That if they would just boot him off, and people do because they just can't handle being stuck on a single point, right? He would just ignore Hamza, Hashim at all here. So that's a different way of doing it. But Mosster's doing a great job. He's just silent and he keeps bringing it back. Yeah. It's not about my worldview. Great responses, right? Let's just see what happens now.
We're asking, you have asked us several questions. I think it is only fair.
Because it's not clarified yet.
With similar, similar problems that everybody faces.
Look at all the responses down the bottom here. I think this tells you kind of a lot about these people, right? All these thumbs down and stuff like that. Hamza, it's almost like he seems to enjoy being a bit like, the emperor. If you go and watch Gladiator, right? When they were the gladiatorial thing and one of them had killed the other, the emperor would do a thumbs up or a thumb down. If you haven't watched Gladiator with, what's his name? And he's doing the same thing here, right? Playing to the crowd. The crowd have no clue what's going on here, the majority of them, right? Even Ben Ikra here is doing a thumbs down. They don't recognize that this is a nuanced discussion. And because their guys are faring so poorly here, they now want to get rid of Mosster. And I think that tells you a lot about the sort of audience that tunes into these streams from Hamza and so on.
Faces with what is right and what is wrong. Even atheists face
correct.
Not every atheist, not everyone who disbelieves in God are actually in tune, in harmony with their worldview. Some atheists might consider abortion as completely wrong. Other atheists will say it's perfectly okay as long as the mother allows it.
So, with regards,
see what I mean? The atheist view is not something that is rooted.
I think we beat this horse. The crowd are not happy.
There's one last point I could make.
Make one last point, because the crowd are not happy.
Your influence of your own whims and desires.
Yeah, he's just rambling.
So with regards to whether or not someone, if they kill someone and they're not aware that what they're doing is wrong, is it immoral? We have an understanding of this already. When someone, say, loses their mind, or if so, like say you have a child who kills someone, we do treat them differently.
Oh, hang on a moment. Now we're shifting the goalposts here to people that are insane or people that don't have a cognitive ability to understand what they're doing. And therefore that somehow doesn't make it wrong because these people don't understand that it's wrong. Russell Crowe, yeah, thank you very much. That's the Gladiator. This is a shifting of the goalposts now.
Absolute?
Yeah, not only is it absolute, but it's a shift. Yeah, and so the point being, if it's not absolute, then you're shifting the goalposts, and now you're pointing to people that are not part of the hypothetical. And Mosster could say, if he had the opportunity, I'm not talking about people that don't have the cognitive ability or who are mentally unstable. I'm talking about normal human beings. Presumably, that's who you're talking about with alcohol, because I could raise the same concerns. What happens if a child drinks alcohol or a mad person drinks alcohol? Is it wrong for them? Presumably, you would say, no, it's not wrong because they don't know what they're doing, right? And if you are going to say it's wrong, well, now you're saying that people who don't have the cognitive ability to understand it are still wrong. Well, then the principle that you're applying now is utterly useless.
Yeah.
There's just so much wrong with these responses. I don't know whether Yusuf will listen to this or whether somebody will get back to him, whether I can have a conversation. I think he's shooting himself in the foot a lot here just because he doesn't understand his own theology, but he doesn't realize the implication of what he's saying. And I think, and maybe we do it privately, maybe he doesn't want to do it, but I think there's a lot here that he said that we're focusing on him at the moment, because the other guys don't know what to say here. So at least he's trying to do something. Okay, he's putting himself out there. I think it's not a good job, and it's self-defeating in many circumstances. And this reductio has shown that. But I think, maybe on Discord or somewhere else, he might be open to having a conversation. We go through this, go, hang on a moment, have a look at this, notice what happens here. Now you don't have these other guys trying to, close ranks and to make arbitrary, unnecessary heckling type points. You can focus on this so you could think about this more deeply. I want you to think. That's what I want. And I think if you think enough, you could see this can't be the case. Right? A, either Allah doesn't exist, or B, if it does, he can't be an all-good God or an omnibenevolent God. And in either of those cases, you shouldn't be a Muslim.
We don't hold them as accountable as someone who takes a life knowing the full consequences of that. And this is something that's present in Islam, so that we have this idea of the age of reason. And the age of reason isn't a particular age necessarily. It varies from person to person. And so if there is someone who kills out of ignorance, this isn't equivalent to someone who kills in full knowledge of whether or not what they're doing.
But not according to your God.
Like even just like if someone has...
What's that, Stops?
I just said, but not according to your God.
Yeah.
Lost, like if someone's mentally incapacitated and they clearly have struggles trying to understand even basic concepts, you're not going to hold this person as, obviously what they've done is still wrong, and you would still need to counter that in some way.
What just happened?
Well, how's it wrong? If they don't understand, hang on a moment. If they don't understand what they're doing and they don't have the cognitive ability, so all you're saying is that something is wrong, whether somebody realizes it's wrong or has the ability to understand whether it's wrong. Well, if you're saying that, then that would apply to anybody or anything, and that would apply to animals as well, or is that only humans? If somebody's insane or somebody's, like I say, a child or something, is it still wrong? Well, we don't hold them responsible. We can claim it's still wrong, but are we holding them responsible? We're talking about whether they should be responsible for this. And you claim that Allah supposedly, now I don't know what your claim is now actually, but if it's always wrong, then he needs to make that clear. And if somebody does something where it's not clear that it's wrong, Allah hasn't prohibited it, then how is it wrong?
And they also forget the bigger picture, that Allah actually knows what he's doing, created this person knowing that we're going to do that. The whole thing falls apart. But I just saw something. Rob, what the fuck is happening with the chat? All of a sudden you're getting thumbs up? What is this? Look what I just saw. Look at this. Look at this.
I don't know what's going on there now. There's a lot of thumbs down there as well. Most of them are thumbs down. So
yeah, but now look. On this page, everything is hearts and thumbs up and great and super. Let's go.
Yeah, well, I think this is because they're
And look,
speaking now, not
willful
him.
ignorance is immoral. Perfect. What
Yeah.
the heck is happening?
Yeah,
it
so-
seems as, wow.
Yeah, so this is, of course, like a gladiatorial thing, which is exactly what he wants, right? This has got nothing to do with the content.
Yes, but this is what he's doing. He's inviting people to have the thumbs down so that he has an excuse to kick him. But what is happening
Correct.
is the opposite. All of a sudden, you have only hearts and thumbs up. What the hell is going
Yeah,
on
but
here?
I'm not sure. But stops. I'm not sure that that's for him. I think that's for the other guys. I don't think this is at all for him. I think these thumbs up and all the rest of it is for the responses that Hashim or that Yusuf are giving, not for him.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I don't think that these people are actually saying that he's given a good response here. I would be absolutely flabbergasted if that was the case. I think they are saying that they are
that's why
thumbs
I am
up their
speechless.
fellow Muslims. So no, I don't. I think it's for the other guys, not for him.
But you're not going to treat them equivalent to a sane, a mukhalif, someone who's like
Just
legally
stop,
responsible.
Just stop there. Go to the comments. Thumbs up 4, and it said 4, but it was too quick. I couldn't read it. Somebody said thumbs up 4. Kick him there. It says kick him. Thumbs down to this guy. Could you please leave and find something beneficial for yourself? And where did I just see this? I saw somebody say thumbs up 4. Thumbs down this guy. Go to the top one. No, not down. Other way.
Yeah, we were here already.
Guy wasting your time. Now you're talking about legal culpability. Before he's ask him how many blah, blah, blah. Who's the guy
No,
bottom
this
left
was all what
corner?
we saw before. I think you saw the thumbs.
I
The
s- I
thumbs
saw
but I'm not sure
something-
it's thumbs. I think it was thumbs down, maybe not thumbs up. Let's just see if there's anything else here.
No, this was
No,
recent. This was one of the last comments.
Yeah, there's nothing for thumbs up. It's thumbs down here. That was the last one that we saw.
Yeah, but you're at the
thumbs
bottom.
down.
If you go to the last one, what is the last comment?
I'm on the last one here. This is the last one.
This is the last one. Okay, the crime was revealed. Representative asking about business coming through 100 miles per
I'm
minute.
not sure it's particularly relevant what these gullible
Okay,
people are thinking.
forget it, because I saw this and I thought, what the hell is going on? Because it seems to be backfiring.
No, I don't. I think they all want to get rid of him, basically, pretty much.
The issue you're raising again is not that big a problem.
So if I can follow up on that, you just demonstrated that we don't need God for morality, right?
No.
We can reason. We can reason that if someone is not mentally.
I haven't done that at all.
But okay, you never used God in this. You just use your reasoning that if someone is a kid, right, and if he's ignorant about something, that we won't punish that person. You don't need. There is nowhere there is God in this picture.
No,
right?
but
You
that
can
still
use your
requires a
reasoning.
law. That still requires a law.
So let's.
Let me just summarize. Okay, in the interest of time.
We're not
In
going
the
to
interest
keep
of
this
time.
going on and on and on.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not go on and on because this is a good argument. We don't know really what we're talking about. I'm getting bored. I can't follow the argument, so I want to get rid of you now. Why don't you just be honest and say that? Then at least we can say you're consistent, right?
Okay, I'm gonna
I think you've been
summarize and
answered.
end.
I'll be honest with you.
I'm gonna.
I think you've been answered. This is such a typical. This tells you whether the Muslim is following along and whether there's any sort of substance you can have with something like. I think you've been answered. Or the question back to somebody like that is, what do you think the answer was and why do you agree with it? Right, that's the question, because otherwise it sounds like there is actually answer. You think it's been answered. What was the answer? Why do you agree with it? Right, put them on the spot. You claim there was an answer. What was it and why do you agree with it? Keep asking that, right? And then you'll see whether you get anything remotely resembling a substantial response, or even a coherent response will be good at this stage. We're lowering the bar right down to just coherent response.
I love when you go
gonna
into
summarize
teacher mode, this teacher mode where I can picture you like you've got glasses on, lowering your head and your eyes are peering over the glasses looking at the guy lecturing him. This is how I picture you at the moment.
Yeah, probably not far off, I guess, if that were the case. Yeah.
summarize and end. I'm just going to summarize and end. So you're saying basically that morality, good or bad, is whatever God commands, good or bad. If he changes his mind about whether something is moral or not, then it's up to him. But that's the divine command theory that you follow. Okay, so that's the Islamic view of that. Okay, thank you.
I would.
Appreciate it.
So it's really interesting that
We'll just get a little bit of hear them now, because now they can talk without him responding, right? And they obviously always do this. So let's just hear. He's basically shown that the demand command theory has no actual foundation. It's entirely up to the desires or the whims, if you want to use that word, of their God, right? Which just means they have no actual foundation. If that's what you're going to claim as a foundation, that's completely and utterly vacuous. But again, I'll just highlight here that you've got to be clear on what objective is at the very, very beginning. I think he did an okay job. He could have made it much stronger at the beginning.
Come on, he's
and
owned
that,
them.
Had he have done that at the beginning, then that response there, if they'd agreed to that, it would have it would have been a blatant contradiction. At the moment, I think it is. It does contradict him. It just wasn't. It could have been even clearer at the very beginning. And if you ask other Muslims whether this is the case, they probably would have to agree as well. If God changes his mind, they might claim that he didn't change his mind, which is why this alcohol thing is so good, or the praying thing is so good while they're drunk, right? Because it shows that it would. And Yusuf's response wasn't a good one, and it contradicts, Sharia, and even Darren Hamza contradicted himself. Let's just listen for a few moments here, I think, just to see if there's anything else to say. Otherwise, we can bring it to a close.
Rather than because it's really easy to come to a conclusion you disagree with something when you make a straw man to represent that thing.
Okay, let's listen in to see whether. This is the other thing with Imran. He throws out the word fallacy and straw man. I don't think he understands what either of these two things are, or that he can point to the example of this now. So if you're going to say that, show us, Imran, where the straw man was. What was it remotely that Mosster said that was a straw man? Can anybody in the chat remotely tell us if there was a straw man from Moster's point of view? What we saw was straw men or red herrings or changing the burden of proof from the other guys. I never heard a single thing that was a red herring. What do you call it? Straw man.
Yeah.
And then you can just pull the straw arms and legs off and say,
well, what is it? Don't tell us. Yeah, don't give us a description. We all understand what a straw man is. Tell us exactly what the straw man was.
You put us against the ropes.
This just doesn't stand up to any any consideration, and you can throw it away. And that's really what we saw, just a straw man. The other thing is
notice, no way is he going to substantiate what the straw man was. I wonder why. And you don't even have him on here to respond. You've got your own guys here. Now, if Yusuf maybe would speak up and say, well, okay, I'm not sure, Imran, what was a straw man? Maybe I missed that. Can you tell me what the straw man? None of them are going to say that, right? So this is now an echo chamber where you can make flat out assertions, and in no way is he even going to remotely tell us what the supposed straw man is.
Is that you need to have some sort of ruler to measure against when you're trying to measure something. And as someone who has no ruler, as an agnostic that he is, he has no, because then where does morality come from? It's either evolutionary or it's societal, whatever you want to do.
We do it one last time with an analogy. Maybe I'll give an analogy. If Imran comes with a stick and he says this is 1 meter, I don't need to know what 1 meter is. And he says this is the 1 meter stick. This is objectively 1 meter. And I come to Imran, I said, how do I know that's 1 meter? Is it because you've measured this against something else that it's 1 meter? Or have you just asserted that's 1 meter and made that the 1 meter, arbitrary 1 meter length of the stick? If Imran says to me, but you don't have a meter stick, I'm saying, no, I don't have a meter stick. I'm asking you, you made the claim this is a meter stick. Tell me how it is that it's a meter stick. How did you measure it to be a meter stick? Did you just arbitrarily decide it or measure it against something else? I do not need to have my own stick in order for me to say, hey, that's not a meter. I'm asking you, why is this a meter stick? Why are you claiming it's an objective meter stick? See, when I make an analogy like that, you can see how absurd it is for him to ask, what is the other person? Why doesn't the other person have a meter stick so we can measure meter sticks? Because I'm not bringing a meter stick. You are bringing one and you're claiming it's an objective meter stick.
Yeah. And this is arbitrary, completely arbitrary. So then what standard are you using to measure or even to deny that other things are moral or immoral? I didn't really understand. There seemed to be a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. May Allah guide him, inshallah.
I think the clue was in ex-Muslim. Never trust an ex to say nice things about you.
Oh, well, that's a wonderful response, isn't it? Very substantive. He didn't say anything bad about you. He brought an argument. The fact that you guys are laughing and saying ad hominems is exactly the point that you seem to be making. You need to look in the mirror. What you guys do or claim the other guy's doing is exactly what you guys do. It's like a mirror image, and the irony is not lost on somebody like me or Stops or hopefully most of the viewers here.
Wow.
I think as well, there's a few of us here, and it gets a bit nerve-wracking for people.
No, he was trying to be clever, needlessly.
How was he
No.
trying to be clever? He was trying to be consistent and stay on the point. You equate clever with being on the point. No wonder you're unable to stay on the point because you don't want to be clever.
You know, you ask us a question, where'd you get objective morality from? God. Right, what's the next question? That's it.
That's it. This is the.
He doesn't
hopefully
understand
you
the whole
guys are
thing.
listening to
He
this.
didn't get
That's
it at
it.
all.
He's an utter simpleton. This guy, he's going to do this professionally, quote unquote. Good luck, right? Good luck with this. This is going to be the level of one of your professional apologists.
I hope a Muslim watches this. Come on.
They should
Please,
be
can
embarrassed. They should be utterly
exactly.
embarrassed.
Any Muslim watching this should realize that there is absolutely no intelligence here, that he did not understand anything that was going on. And this last comment should actually convince anyone of that fact.
Do you think it's going to get any better? I mean, it took him 5 months in Speaker's Corner to understand what a belief was. He still hasn't quite got that right.
No, he still doesn't.
What do you think the
No,
chances
come on,
of
I
him
made 9
understanding the
videos.
dilemma?
I analyzed 9 of his videos and I made responses to 9 of his videos, and I showed him that he still does not understand what's going on. He still is absolutely clueless.
Whatever God says is objective
That's
morality.
the reason I asked him the question.
So
as
if
to
God
what is
says
your
now
worldview, and
rape
he-
is okay, then you're going to say rape is perfect? Just because God says it's good, is that good? This is exactly Euthyphro's dilemma. You have not understood what this is about. This is... I can't believe it. We've been talking now for the last, I don't know, how long has this been going on? I think 30 minutes. Only about the Euthyphro dilemma. How do you know that what is God is good and so on, and you still don't understand it?
Yeah. No, I don't think he will at any point in the future, right? He will claim that it's been answered. By answered, he means people have made unsubstantial, because he doesn't realize it, right? As long as his guys on his team open their mouth and they say something, whether or not he can understand it is seemingly irrelevant to him, because all you have to do is say to him, well, okay, what was the substantial point that was made, right? At this point, there would be complete silence or some sort of gibberish response. And that will tell you all you need to know, right? As long as one of his guys open their mouth, it's been answered. That's the level that we're
Rob,
talking about here.
can I ask you a question? If somebody came to you and said, okay, you are an atheist, where do you get your moral standards from?
Yeah, so I would say to me that to somebody that the subjective, I take it to be the case. There's certain things that I presuppose, and I take it to be the case that well-being is my standard for morality, and the worst possible misery is what I call bad. That's my standard,
Right.
and I can't argue for it objectively. But if you accept that standard,
Exactly, and
now
this is
we can have a
exactly-
conversation.
Exactly, and this is the point that I'm trying to make. If somebody asks you the question, you have an answer which does 2 things. Number 1, it clarifies your position, and number 2, you are inviting someone to go and challenge you. And if somebody comes up and challenges you and shows you that you are wrong, you are prepared to update your knowledge base to reflect the latest, understanding of what it is that somebody's just taught you. That's fine. That is the way it should be. I don't know, have you heard of Abraham Maslow?
Yeah.
Okay. This is how we get morality. This is how it works. He has gone and developed the pyramid. How we go from the very basic, in other words, less pain is better than more pain. So he has developed this whole thing. And this is how we get an understanding of how we as human beings react in our as sentient beings. And if we then go look at mammals and we go look at other animals, we see similarities there as well. But the most obvious case is the human being. And this is where we get this from. And these people do not understand this. And this is why I don't understand why somebody like Imran doesn't understand this, doesn't know this, has never heard of this, and has never thought about this. This is where I'm very disappointed. And this is where I say, okay, my expectation here is very, very wrong. And this is so funny that if you ask an atheist about this, they will at least think about this. But these guys are not even prepared to think about it.
You always try to evade that, because you see what they do is they come with a preconceived
shut
idea.
the
They're
fuck
already
up, you
the
stupid
question
idiot.
they're asking. It's more rhetorical. They
Yeah,
already
I
have
know. It's clear.
with a set answer. Unless I get that set answer, that I'm going to keep asking questions. But as soon as we ask questions, they'll evade that. This is something that I've noticed at Speaker's Corner as well. First thing is they're reluctant to say what their faith is, which is like,
yeah, because it's totally irrelevant if they're asking you what your position is utterly irrelevant. And the fact that you have to ask demonstrates to people, or should demonstrate to people who are paying attention, that you're a poor interlocutor. You don't understand why they're asking you. And if people start to learn to say, hey, I'm doing an internal critique, that means my worldview is irrelevant to yours. I'm looking at your view of Islam and asking you questions about your worldview. Whatever you say about my worldview is irrelevant. I could be, like I say, a Hindu, I could be anything, and it's irrelevant. And the fact that you think that you can explain your morality differently to other people just shows how ignorant you are on this basic concept of being able to have an explanation for your worldview. I'm going to say the same thing about my views, whether I'm asked of a Hindu or of anybody else, and they just don't realize this, right? But again, we aren't, these are not the strongest guys, but they're the guys that are in Speaker's Corner. They obviously have, unfortunately, a large following of seemingly very gullible people that are riled up by emotion. If you went to ask any of these people in the chat here, almost none of them would have anything substantial to say. Out of this whole thing, they might take a soundbite here and there, but if you ask them to put forward the strongest argument they heard from the Muslim side and why they accept it as true, if you found 1 out of 100, I'd be very surprised. Probably 1 out of 500 if you're lucky.
this is exactly what
It
happened.
looks like
with this guy,
I misinterpreted the chat, because I see now hearts and thumbs up, so I think I got it wrong.
Yeah, no, this was all about them, right? At no point did they think that it was the other guy.
I got my hopes
Yes,
up.
but anyway, Allah gave him hidayah, Allah gave him understanding.
So
But
next in the reading, we've got Adam.
If I could just say something just
Yeah.
quickly. I was interested in listening to his position because I think people come on here assuming that this is an interrogation, but it's meant to be a dialogue. And in order to have a dialogue, you need to have a basis for your understanding as well. I wanted to ask him the question, is murder wrong? And I wanted him to give a justification for it. The reason...
Okay, so this guy's also ignorant of this. If somebody comes in to ask you a line of questioning, they're interested in your worldview and how you... Because again, if you claim that it's all perfect and it's wonderful and it's the best thing out there, then you need to justify that. And asking a question to somebody else is not going to help them accept your worldview is true. Their worldview could be incoherent. They could be the worst person in the world. But if they're asking about your worldview, their worldview at this moment in time is irrelevant. As long as they accept a rational argument, they don't have to accept that murder is right, wrong, or anything else. They want you to explain why you think it is objectively wrong. And pointing to them is utterly irrelevant. So this particular fellow is just as clueless as Hashim on this point.
Yeah.
Reason being, we as Muslims, we know why murder is wrong, because Allah has declared it a sin. We can also know it because it harms people generally. But what...
Okay, well, you can't actually say that because now you're appealing to the second horn of the dilemma. So you also don't understand Euthyphro's dilemma.
Basis would he be okay, for example, if he believes that morality is subjective, would he be okay if there was a country in the world, a state, where murder was permissible, where murder was legal? Would he be okay with that? And I wanted to see if he could answer a question and give a justification for it, because then he would be falling back on his own whims and desires. Of course it's wrong. Well, why? Because other people say it's wrong. Or he may say because it harms someone. People use the negative harm principle, right?
So that's a principle. That's not a whim, is it? What you could say is that it's not objective, i.e. that it's something you can select, that one ought, that there's no knockdown argument suggests you ought to or that you must follow that principle. The exact same thing applies to your worldview anyway. So even if someone gave that justification, which many philosophers and many people do, and I probably would, or at least word it slightly differently, what's the inconsistency? The best thing you can say, or the worst thing you can say, is that it's not objective. Well, do you think that that's in any way a critique against my view, when you can't demonstrate that your worldview is objective? If there was, in fact, an objective worldview, and it had a philosophically sound point, and I agreed with the presuppositions, then I would look at changing my mind. But you pointing to it and say it's subjective, to me, your guys is entirely subjective. Not only that, it's worse than that. You have no way to establish or even argue for other than to say it's God's whims or his desires. So what makes God's whims or desires any better than somebody else's well thought through, quote, desires or whims? And we could give a rational argument for why we go with well-being or whatever the case is. I'm not claiming it's objective. I'm claiming that I can give a rational argument. At this moment in time, you guys can't even give a rational argument All you can give is assertions, and even those are poorly backed up, and you disagree with each other. So this has not been a good show for you.
So I was really interested in seeing what primitive arguments, meaning what core beliefs or ideas holds him down to what morality actually is, because he really does seem like an individual who believes that morality is an objective quality in the universe, and I'm sorry, I just don't see it that way.
You just totally weren't tracking the conversation at all. He didn't say one way or the other about his moral position, and he was right not to go down that route. He asked you about your moral position.
And I don't like it when he told that he can do an interrogation, but we can ask him, where did that come from? And to tell
That's what you guys do in Speaker's Corner all the time. Have you forgotten? Have you got a short memory? You guys go down this route all the time. Hashim is a master of challenging the Christians on the Trinity and not allowing them to ask anything else. So now you're suddenly, when the shoe is on the other foot and you guys have to answer questions, which you don't always do, or you do very poorly, then somehow you're uncomfortable or unhappy with that. Just have a little bit of consistency. What do you guys do when you challenge on these other shows, right, the historical claims of the Christians? Are you allowing them to critique the Quran at that stage and have it backwards and forwards? No, and Hamza is very clear. This is the conversation. Here, this guy came on and he was very clear in the beginning what his position was and what he wanted to go down. And that's exactly what Hamza does with his thing. So what's your problem here? Be consistent. Just because you don't like it's uncomfortable or you can't answer the questions. Don't now have a double standard when somebody else wants to do the same thing that you guys do to other people when he wants to do it to you.
to tell Hashim that of all people, he'll eat you alive for breakfast.
Right. So we're going to bring Adam on next. I'm not.
Okay, so I think the next guy that comes on, or one of these guys, is a Christian or whatever happens now. So I think let's bring that to an end. We're getting late here.
Yeah.
Stops. Closing thoughts.
I think Mosster did a brilliant job of putting them against the ropes, asking questions which were very valid. There are a couple of tweaks and things that could have been improved. But overall, I think this is a marvelous job because, given that you're under, like adrenaline is pumping and blah, 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 this is really, really excellent. And I really like the way it was done. And it shows, again, the inconsistency, the evasiveness, the inability to address questions adequately of Muslim apologists. So I think this was like maybe an A- or something from him. There were little bits could have been tweaked or something, but it's a total fail on the Muslim side who didn't manage to address anything that he asked.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I'll also just post here. Hopefully it'll come up. So, Mosster, I've sent you the link for this. Even if you're not watching now, I'm posting in here. Do feel free to join our Discord server. There's the link in the chat at the bottom there now. I'll try and put that into the description of the video afterwards, if I remember. But just ping me if you need it again. I'll give you the link, and you're more than welcome to come and join us on the Gin and Tonic. We'll chat further. I think you did a good job as well. I think you were calm, collected. You stayed on point. Very important. We saw here how they tried to divert all over the show. You've also noticed, hopefully, that don't say anything that you don't need to. Don't add superfluous things here because they'll latch onto that, try and make a trivial point, and then claim victory on something, and then you never get back to the original discussion. So I thought you did a great job on the occasions when they try to divert. You brought them back there. I would say the biggest thing, if nothing else out of this, get very clear on the definition of objective. Get them to agree in the beginning that it's a fact of the matter, it's mind independent, it's unchanging, and then you go from there, because then you can bring it back. The fact that these guys were able to say, well, like Hamza, well, whatever God says, right, if he changes his mind, it's still objective. That's utterly absurd, right? And you pointed that out with the reductio when Yusuf tried to claim, the same sort of thing. Hey, well, if people are ignorant of it, is it still immoral, or should they be held accountable? So I think you did a really good job. It's a few fine tweaks there. Hopefully you can go back and watch this again if you need to, if you've got all this far. Hopefully it was valuable to everybody in the chat as well. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it was entertaining. The other thing I'd say in closing is you can see also why that even if Stops and I could get on the show, this thing is heavily moderated in a sense of Hamza can't follow any of these nuanced arguments. He's now appealing to the audience. So this is like a gladiatorial thing, which is always what I said. If you go back and look, this is what they actually want, and that's the point down in Speaker's Corner. This is not about having a nuanced, honest discussion. This is about looking good and about trying to appeal to their audience. And we saw it very clearly here with a thumbs up, thumbs down, like the emperor in Gladiator. It's all about the appeal to the crowd, and because he attracts a crowd of simpletons and gullibility. They wouldn't know a good argument from a bad one if you gave them a manual and taught them how to read and to think clearly. I very much doubt they would. My intention is to get people to think clearly, but as you can see here, it's an uphill battle with this sort of people. But we'll persist. Hopefully, these sort of reviews will help, and I think that's the best we can do. So, on behalf of my colleague and myself, we want to thank you for your time, and we'll be back again with another one. Send us either grab me on Twitter, which is Speaker's Corner UK, or grab us on Discord. Stops and I've got some other videos that we can do, but if there's anything like this that you think is either a good performance by somebody or you think is particularly bad by somebody else, normally we want to critique the atheist versus Muslim. That's our sort of focus mostly. We're not interested in Christian versus Muslim. So yeah, please do send us anything and we'll have a look at that and see. But for now, thank you very much. Good night. Take care. And we'll see you again soon.
Yes, Discord is running a lot more active than it used to.
There we go again. There it is. And on that note, I want to say thank you and good